Hey guys, how's it going? Today I have 3 hours of some of the most unsettling Reddit stories that I've ever read. Whether you're putting this on in the background to help you get something done, whether you're studying or trying to sleep, I hope you enjoy. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. The first one today is from r/scary stories from user trash_tia. Every summer, the kids in my town are forced to attend mandatory summer camp. It held a horrific secret. I was 13 years old when I first saw a kid try to escape. Clara Danvers was a senior at Aceville High. She wore pastel colors and flower crowns in her hair. I don't know her very well since I attended the middle school down the road, but I knew she was one of the most popular girls in her class. Clara was the type all girls in our town aspired to be. Her beauty wasn't eye-catching in a town like Aceville, where all of its people were ridiculously attractive. Clara was running from the inevitable. Summer camp. And camp was mandatory in Aceville. At the time, I wasn't sure why. All I knew was that all 18-year-olds were obligated to attend summer camp for the remainder of their summer before college. And yes, you would be right in thinking it was practically a human rights violation. It was their summer. Aceville's kids were teetering on the edge of adulthood and responsibilities, their teen years and beloved childhoods dwindling, and that last summer meant a lot to them. Of course, they fought back. Clara Danvers didn't strike me as a rebel. She looked like the type of girl who followed all the rules and joined as many extracurriculars as possible. She had the perfect friends, the perfect boyfriend, straight A's, and was Harvard-bound, according to word-of-mouth traveling. However, on July 16, 2016, I saw a different side to her. The memory is vague, though I remember small tidbits. I remember being in the store with my mother. I remember it being a hot day, the kind of heat I hated. It was too warm to think straight, and all I wanted to do was sit in the backyard and read. I didn't have a choice whether I accompanied my mother, though she had blackmailed me with the reward of getting a new comic. Mom was talking to the cashier. She was friends with half the town, so I wasn't surprised when every person she passed bid a hello, shooting a smile at me. I remember being bored. I needed to pee, and I was at that point in my life when I was wary of being seen shopping with my mom. It was pretty much social death for a 7th grader to be seen with their mom. So, keeping my head down and pulling my baseball cap further over my face, I headed over to the comic book section. All my favorites were there, and I had $10 to spend. I was in my element. Skimming through Spider-Man issues, I found myself captivated by the colors. Spider-Man was a kid's comic, I knew that. I'd made the mistake of pulling one out of my backpack at school, only for Summer Forrest to snatch it out of my hands and hold it up in the air. A wicked smile on her face. Do you still read Spider-Man? No, I snapped back, my cheeks burning bright. Liar, Summer snorted. You still read Spider-Man. Isn't that like for little kids? I shrugged. It's a good comic book. It's for kids, Summer laughed. You're so weird, Adeline. I'm not going to say it was traumatizing. Some kids had laughed along and some had ignored Summer. I snatched the comic off of her and shoved it back in my bag. Then, on the way to class, I shoved it in the trash and started watching makeup YouTube tutorials. I still wasn't completely healed from that incident, so ignoring a smiling Mary Jane in a funky lab coat, I moved on to the more adult comics. Well, they were adult in my kid brain at least. Picking up Teen Titans, I flipped it over and scanned the back. Mom was still chatting to the cashier, and my urge to pee wasn't going away. I figured stepping outside to cool off would be a good idea, even when I knew I was just stepping back into the baking heat, away from the pathetic cooling fan sitting near the door. My plan was to go back to the car and blast the AC. Mom was going to be in there for a while. I could tell by the way she was leaning against the counter, already making her roots. I was sliding into Mom's car, trying not to wince when my bare legs sunk into the hot leather, when a scream rang out, startling me. When I had twisted around scanning the parking lot in front of the store, I saw her. Clara Danvers, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, her sneakers pounding against steaming tarmac, her strict blonde ponytail flying behind her. Clara was running for her life. At first, I thought she was running from some kind of animal. Coyote attacks were common, but not in broad daylight. Except Clara wasn't running from an animal. I recognized Miss Peters, one of the high school teachers. Mom had been friendly with her. Miss Peters was in her mid-40s and wore thick sweaters in 90-degree heat. The last thing I thought I'd ever see was the teacher sprinting after the retreating senior. The kind of look in her eyes that I had known my whole life, replaced with a look of intense determination. It was almost comical, like I was watching a cartoon. I laughed. I felt bad, but it was hard to ignore that hysterical spew of laughter crawling up my throat. Clara was a good runner. Maybe she was on the track team. Though Miss Peters, amazingly, was faster. She was in good shape for her age. Long strides catapulting her further forwards, swinging arms driving momentum. Clara Danvers! The teacher wasn't out of breath, though neither was Clara. Neither of them were giving up. Watching the bizarre display, I found myself following them, though I was slower, darting behind parked cars, keeping myself hidden. There was something clutched in Clara's hand. When she brought it to her ear, her eyes wide and wild, lips moving frantically, I realized she was talking to someone. When Clara twisted around to scan for the teacher, I knew she had made a mistake. I watched the scene unravel in front of me like it was going in slow motion. Clara's phone slipped from her grasp and she let out a sharp cry, ducking to try and snatch it back up. But the teacher was on her tail. "Miss Danvers, you are acting like a child." The teacher reached out and snatched the girl by the back of her shirt. Clara shrieked, trying to battle her way out of the teacher's grasp, but Miss Peters' grip was harsh, her fingernails sticking into the bare flesh of Clara's arms. "Get off me." The girl was acting like a caged animal, and I didn't understand. It was just camp, right? I understood Clara and her class not wanting to go because it was their last summer to be free and be kids again. Maybe the girl was acting dramatic, but I could empathize with her. I watched Miss Peters drag the girl, spitting and cursing, away. I can still remember their words. Clara Danvers didn't swear. At least, that's what I thought. She was the golden girl, after all. Clara was yelling names, presumably those of her friends, and Miss Peters was struggling to keep a hold of her. "Miss Danvers, please calm down." We were very clear at the assembly that we would take necessary measures to make sure every senior is on that bus. Clara dug the soles of her Converse into the tarmac. She reminded me of a petulant child throwing a tantrum. "I don't want to go to camp. I have my own life, you know." You're part of this town as well as the high school, which means rules still apply. But I'm 18. I'm a legal adult. Miss Peters ignored her outburst. As I said, you are still a student. Therefore, you are expected to follow rules. One of them is that the senior class will attend a mandatory summer camp before college. This has been going on for years, Miss Danvers. I expected more from a class valedictorian. The teacher sighed, like the girl was a defiant little kid. "You have been one of the smartest in your class since your freshman year, Clara. I did not expect this lack of intelligence from you. Do not ruin your reputation by acting like a child." Clara sputtered. "Oh, I'm the child? You just sprinted after me for 3 blocks over a damn summer camp, and I'm the one acting like a kid?" "Clara, stop." "I will if you let go. Hey, you're hurting me." The two of them were getting further away, and all I could do was watch their shadows stretching across the sidewalk. I was debating whether to follow them to wherever they're going, but a hand was grabbing my shoulder. I twisted around and found my mother. She didn't look mad or confused. Mom didn't question why I had disappeared. Instead, her gaze had snapped to where I had been watching Clara and the teacher. Mom's eyebrows furrowed, her lip curling like she was about to say something before seemingly snapping out of it. Mom shoved paper bags of groceries into my arms with a light smile, and I struggled to get a strict hold of them. She was looking at me, but I could have sworn her gaze was wandering, searching for something. "Did you pick a comic book?" I shook my head. I felt kind of sick. Clara Danvers didn't have a choice whether she went to camp or not. None of her class did. When they tried to skip out, they were treated like animals. For summer camp. I couldn't understand why it was mandatory. No other town forced their kids to go to camp, so why did ours? I tried to smile at Mom. "Can we just go home?" Mom looked like she was going to protest, but nodded. She had that expression, the one I dreaded, when she was trying to read me, delving into my mind. I wasn't a talkative kid, so my mom turned into my therapist. On that occasion, however, it was different. She paid no attention to my sickly cheeks and the lump in my throat. "All right." Mom inclined her head. I tried to ignore her craning her neck. She was definitely aware of Clara Danvers being wrestled onto a school bus. "Are you sure you're okay?" I chose to ignore the terrified faces of seniors pressed against the bus windows. "Yeah," I said, "I just feel sick." "Okay, let's go get something to drink." I don't know how I managed to keep my mouth shut and nod, following Mom back to the car. It's not like Aceville's bizarre rule was a secret. I just didn't want to talk about it. Neither did Mom, from the look on her face. Instead of grilling me like usual, she took me for chocolate fudge sundaes at our local diner. I still remember the sticky feeling in my stomach when I struggled to swallow it, washing it down with Coke. I tried hard to pretend that everything was okay, but I couldn't stop thinking about Clara and the way she had been treated. Dread filled me like poison, shivers rattling up and down my spine. I couldn't sit still. Was that my future? Was I going to be hunted down like that? That's what I kept thinking. When Mom was talking excitedly about her plans for our next family vacation, I was discreetly counting on my fingers how many years I had before I turned 18. Until seeing Clara dragged like an animal by a teacher I considered one of the nicest people in town, I looked forward to 18. It was the age of independence, the peak of teenagehood. Though excitement turned to dread. I never saw Clara again, or the class of 2016. It's a well-known fact that freshly graduated kids go to camp, and then straight to college. But I still found it strange. Once they were gone, the town forgot them and turned their attention to the new senior class. I watched this happen for 5 years. Kids followed in Clara's footsteps. She had started the rebellion after all, though none of them came close to escape like her. I watched them tear through the woods, laughing and whooping like it was a game. The girls stripped down to two-piece swimsuits, and in 2018, Mikey Blake streaked. It almost went viral. Clara's story spread like a virus, and seniors took it as an opportunity to one-up her. I guess it became less of something to be scared of, and more to anticipate. Sure, no kid wanted to be stuck at summer camp, but it was the hunt beforehand that excited them. They were always caught. Always wrestled to the ground and treated just like Clara Danvers. Over the years, however, it became less scary to watch and more exciting, like watching the latest blockbuster. Who didn't want to watch kids chased by teachers with way too much time on their hands? I watched them year after year. My friends and I made bets on who would and wouldn't get caught. We sat on the sidewalk with soda and burgers from the diner, cheering them on. We didn't pay attention to how they were treated. In our minds, it was fun. I won $200 in 2019. I bet my friend at least 5 seniors would try to skip town, and they did. Aceville felt like it was stuck in limbo between the 1980s and the present. Sure, we all had cell phones and TikTok, but my aunt and uncle drove a total boomermobile. Our local diner had an old-style aesthetic, and half the town didn't even have televisions. Maybe they preferred to stay in the old days, though it's not like I was complaining. I liked it. I liked that we were different from others. Aceville. An idealistic town where there were more teens than adults. My friend Nick used to joke that it was like living in the world of Stranger Things. I had to agree. Luckily, though, we weren't under any threats from aliens, from different dimensions, and teenagers with Carrie-like powers. 5 years after Clara, after watching the same stuff year after year, it was finally our turn. The class of 2020. I was standing in the exact same store I had been in 5 years ago when I first saw Clara, when I first witnessed the hunt. This time, however, I wasn't with my mother. I'd managed to score a part-time job to pay for college, and I'd just finished my shift. Smells Like Teen Spirit was playing for the millionth time that day on crappy intercom radio. I did suggest the owner invest in an Alexa and got a Kids These Days lecture in return. He couldn't afford a decent radio, so every song I liked had been mercilessly murdered. Thankfully, the store was empty that afternoon. It was a hot summer day in the middle of July, and the majority of the town, minus my class, were at the local swimming pool cooling off. This was the kind of heat that made me want to bury my head in the ground. There was zero aircon, so I had been fanning myself with old pamphlets. It was my last day at my job, and I had been rewarded with half of my wage and a crushed piece of chocolate cake wrapped in a napkin. "Have fun at camp," was all my boss said, his smile a little too wide. I had no doubts that the asshole had already gambled the rest of my wage on whether my class would be captured or not. Throwing the cake away, I stuffed the crumpled notes into my shorts. I should have been thinking about college that day. I should have been thinking about how the hell I was going to pay for my tuition with barely $300. But I wasn't. I just had to survive the day, and then I'd think about college. Checking my phone, I made sure I had blocked my mother, as well as my aunt and uncle. Dad wasn't in the picture. Not much to say, I never knew him. Dad went for milk and cigarettes and never came back. Checking and rechecking the time, I pulled off my work shirt and stuffed it in the trash. I would definitely attract attention looking like a neon traffic light. I had spent the last hours of my shift going over the plan in my head. It wasn't foolproof, and we had thought it up while drunk and high on mushrooms, but it was still the plan. Stepping out into the relentless heat, I was hopeful. Unlike my classmates, I wasn't joining their game. I had no intention of going to camp. I had been curious as a kid, but over the years the novelty had worn off. It was my last summer with Nick and Bobby, and I was going to spend every day with them doing what I wanted. We spent half of the year planning a road trip to Florida, and I was going to use the time away from the town to finally come clean to Mom about Bobby. I was going to tell her everything, disappear for the summer, and sneak back in September and grab my things. I didn't have plans for post-summer. I was smart enough for my dream college, but it was my lack of cash. Mom wasn't that well off and had made it clear that if I wanted to go to college, I had to pay for it myself. Nick had thrown it at me the night before. I scanned the parking lot. So far, it was clear. Tying my hair into a ponytail, I stepped out into the sticky air that made my skin crawl. I twisted the dial on the walkie and held it to my mouth. Before I could speak, Nick's voice came through in a burst of hissing static. Damn, it's hot. They couldn't have picked a worse day to play their little game. Rolling my eyes, I couldn't resist a smile. What are the talkies for again? You forgot to say over. What are the talkies for? I paused for a moment. Over? Because it's fun, Nick shot back. I could hear his heavy breathing as he catapulted into a run. Are you at the store? I'm heading towards the car. He paused. So far, no sign of teachers, which is a bad sign. That means they're lying in wait. I choked out a laugh. Nicholas, are you enjoying this? Our only entertainment is TikTok and catching fireflies in mason jars, he laughed. Of course I'm enjoying this. He let out a sharp hiss. Oh shit, I've got visuals on Miss Cater. She's on the warpath. Just gone past the dry cleaners. I'm gonna need to get to you slowly. I'm going slowly. No, I mean like slow motion slowly. Let's just focus on getting out of here. I started walking, checking for pursuers. According to the mass text the school had sent this morning, all seniors were expected to be on the bus at 1:30. It was 1:15. The plan was to get to Nick's car, where we had stuffed all of our bags the night before, and step on it. Of course our parents had figured we were going to try and flee town, so our cars had been confiscated. Luckily though, Nick worked at a junkyard. He'd spent months turning a hunk of junk into a decent enough ride, so we were already one step ahead of them. Starting to jog, I leapt across the parking lot. Bobby, are you there? My stomach sank when the name escaped my lips, that feeling I'd been fighting with since we'd met, returning with vengeance. It wasn't confusion when I was 14 and had butterflies. No, it was guilt. I'd made a promise that I would tell Mom about us, but Mom was different. She wouldn't understand. She hated the idea of me dating. I took a guy home for dinner in sophomore year, and she politely told him to leave. When he didn't, Mom started screaming at him. Mom was already weird about Bobby just being a friend. I had zero doubts that she was going to freak out when I told her it was actually something more. Bobby's voice was soft and smooth, slipping so effortlessly through static like it belonged there. I'm about 2 minutes away. I raided my mom's kitchen for snacks before I left. Nick whooped. See, this is why I prefer you over Addie. This time I spluttered. That hurts. I've been working. I could hear the grin in his voice. You're not making your case any better. Bobby's voice cut through our laughter. Did you tell your mom about us yet, Addie? I stopped laughing, my footstep faltering. The sun was a bastard baking into my back, and I struggled to speak through the breath caught in my throat. I was struggling to coerce basic words when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Expecting it to be a teacher, I started backing away, lowering my hand holding the talkie. But then I glimpsed familiar blonde curls tied into pigtails, catching the sun almost perfectly. The figure wasn't that far away, but I saw all of her, and I felt myself shatter. I wanted to tell Mom. I really did, but it was hard. Robin Atwood was the first person I fell for. Bobby was beautiful like every other kid in town, and I was still struggling to figure out how she liked someone like me. I had a stubby nose, and my eyes were too far apart. In a town full of pretty people, I was kind of a bad egg. It sucked that my parents had given me bad genes. Robin was perfect. Angelic features, a heart-shaped face, and hair like liquid silk. Bobby was out. She had told her mother when we started dating. I chickened out. Luckily, our moms weren't mutual friends. If they were, screw camp. I'd probably be in military school. Bobby's smile was sweet, though I did raise my eyebrows at her prom dress. Not exactly the best outfit to escape town in, but her shoes were cute. Bobby's hair was tied back, stray curls dancing in her eyes. She was sweating, her cheeks paler than normal. Bobby was an anxious person in general, so the escape plan was probably tearing her apart inside. Still, she put on a brave face. Instead of talking about my mom, she pulled me into a quick hug, lacing her fingers in mine. I knew the conversation about my cowardice was coming, but it could wait. Bobby reached into her tote bag, pulling out a share pack of candy and waving them in my face. I did get you these for the car ride, since you promised to talk to your mom, but sure, I'll eat them on my own. I scoffed, shoving her when she laughed. Thanks. Fine, I'll give them to Nick. I tried to snatch the pack off of her. I'm pretty sure he's allergic, so good luck killing him. Nick's laugh came through, tangled in static. I look forward to being poisoned. Bobby was fast, so were her instincts. Before I could grab them, she shoved them in her bag, her lips splitting into a grin. She was pissed, but she wasn't pissed enough for an argument. Well, it's not like we had time to have an argument. We should get going. Bobby squeezed my hand. Let's go. At that moment, all the dread eating me up inside slipped away. I pulled Bobby into a run, and we left the parking lot, darting across the street. I could hear yelling in the distance. No doubt our classmates were either getting caught or pulling a fast one. Nick, I said into the talkie, are you close? To my surprise, there was no answer. Nick had found every opportunity to use the damn things, so it was strange that he disappeared. Bobby tried her talkie. Nick, are you there? The junkyard was a 5-minute walk and maybe a 2-minute run, if we sprinted. Nick wasn't answering, and the closer we got to the junkyard, a bad feeling started to coil in the pit of my gut. When I slowed down, bending over with my hands on my knees, gasping into humid air, Bobby tried to speak to Nick again. She shook the talkie with a frown. Maybe it's faulty? I fixed her with a skeptical look. Both of them? I straightened up and pulled my phone out of my shorts. 25 past. The teachers were most likely doing a head count and were already on the prowl. I was shaking with adrenaline. We should get to the car, I gasped out. Our best case scenario is the idiot got distracted or broke the talkie. We shouldn't assume the worst. Bobby nodded, though her smile was thin. When we started running again, our shoes pounding the steaming tarmac, I felt a rush of deja vu. My ponytail flew behind me, and I pumped my arms and legs hard, propelling my body faster. I was just like Clara, except unlike her, I was going to make it. At least that's what I thought. The junkyard was in my sight when the walkie crackled with static. I was frowning at the mass of beaten-up cars covered in dirt and old engines, when an all too familiar voice filled the air. Adeline Calstone and Robin Atwood. The voice of our math teacher, Mr. Fuller, sent shivers crawling up my spine. I felt sick. There was no way he had tracked us down that fast. How was that even possible? Suddenly, all I could think about was Clara. All I could think about was the way she was dragged, kicking and screaming, and our class had treated it like a game. That was until it was our turn. Mr. Fuller's voice was stern. I suggest abandoning whatever plan you have and making your way to the school bus, please. When I was considering smashing the talkie against the gravel sidewalk, he continued. Your friend Nick Castor is a good runner, I'll give him that, but not fast enough. I expected more from a varsity captain. Asshole, Nick grumbled through the talkie. I took us all the way to regionals. Twisting around, my heart dropped into my gut. Nick's voice wasn't just clear on the talkie. It was close. Too close. I froze. Bobby pulled her hand from mine and squeaked, her hand slapping over her mouth. When I saw the two of them coming toward us, Mr. Fuller dragging Nick, I had the split-second thought of grabbing Bobby and running for it, but I wasn't going to leave my best friend. It didn't take long before the three of us were rounded up. Nick Castor was the quintessential high school golden boy. He stood at an imposing 6 feet with a lean, athletic build that spoke to years of dedication on the football field. His dark brown hair was awkwardly styled, and his freckle-dusted skin gave him an almost boyish charm. I used to have a crush on Nick as a little kid. Then he opened his mouth. Now the boy was more like an annoying older brother. Are the restraints really necessary? Nick spat when we were cuffed and pushed into the back of Mr. Fuller's car. Some people might call it kidnapping, but in Aceville on July 16th, it was the norm. We sat squeezed together in the back. Fuller's car was a dinosaur. I was pretty sure he was listening to music on the tape player. Nick tried singing along in his attempt to annoy the teacher into letting us go. I think he was trying to sing badly, but the guy was a decent singer. Halfway through Highway to Hell and a surprisingly good guitar solo he was somehow managing with his arms pinned behind his back, complete with annoying mouth noises, I dug my elbow in his gut. Nick Castor failed at a lot of things, like reading the room for example, and social cues. He was supposed to be getting tested for ADHD, but according to the school, Nick was too sociable to be neurodivergent. I called BS, but his parents agreed. The car ride didn't take long and was uncomfortable. The three of us were squashed like sardines with barely any space to move or breathe. Nick's knee was digging into my back, Bobby's head in my lap. When we arrived at school, we were thankfully uncuffed and transferred to the bus. I wasn't expecting us to be the ones they were waiting on. I also wasn't expecting a round of sarcastic applause. Even Sadie and Danny had been caught. Nick did a mocking bow, and Fuller thwacked the back of his head. I told you wouldn't make it, Jack Carlisle yelled. Bobby pulled a face. At least we tried. When I was pushing my way to the back of the bus, keeping a tight hold of Bobby's hand and Nick's sleeve, we were greeted to a deluge of faces. Some kids held their hands up for a high five, which Nick happily slapped, but the majority of them looked disappointed. If we had failed to escape, then it really was impossible. There was no way out. Camp was inevitable. I found a seat quickly, right at the back, pulling Nick and Bobby next to me. Well, that failed. Nick let out a nervous laugh when the bus started moving. Your fault, Bobby grumbled. If you weren't kidnapped by our math teacher, we'd be halfway out of town right now. Nick tipped his head back with a laugh. Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry for being chased for 3 blocks and threatened with a rock. I sent him a look. He threatened to throw a rock at you? Nick didn't meet my gaze. Yep, the guy's a psycho. I had to surrender. I've told you guys like 15 times that man is bad news, but you never listen to me. He trailed off when my gaze wandered. Like now, for example, Nick continued. I could say Fuller was my father, and you'd be like, oh wow, really? That's cool, Nick. The boy's babbling faded into a dull murmur in my head. I was frowning at 2 men dressed in black that had jumped at the last minute. They didn't look like anyone I knew. The 2 of them stationed themselves at the front. They didn't really fit in the whole summer camp aesthetic. Nick was still talking when sound slammed into me. And that's why I don't get it. Glenn was a great character, and they just killed him. Brutally, too. His head looked like a deflated beach ball. I had no choice but to settle down in my seat and let the nauseating movements on the bus send my stomach hurtling into my throat. Nick pulled out his switch, and Bobby lay her head against the window. I guess none of them wanted to talk, though I didn't blame them. Nick wanted to show me his new game, but I got bored. The lore was confusing and kept going off on tangents and forgetting what he was saying. When my phone buzzed an hour into the journey, I had switched it off without looking at the screen. I had zero interest in talking to my smug mother. I don't know how long we were on the bus, but at points I felt like we were going in circles. I could have sworn we passed the same sign, but when I pointed it out, Nick mumbled something unintelligible and Bobby was sleeping. Outside, the sky turned eerily dark. I could have been wrong, but I was sure we had been on the bus for hours and nobody was questioning it. The others were either asleep or had earphones corked in. When we came to an abrupt stop, Bobby woke up and Nick put his switch away. The rest of the class seemed to snap out of the trance-like state that had swallowed them up. They started to ask questions. We were all ignored. Instead, one of the two men I'd spotted earlier stood up and addressed us. "Could I have your attention, please?" He cleared his throat. "My name is Lawrence Shade, and I'm a recruiter. In a few minutes, you will watch a small film we have prepared which will give us an idea of where to categorize you. Please be aware that watching the film is mandatory." "What?" Summer Forrest laughed. "This is a joke, right? Isn't this supposed to be at camp?" As soon as the words slipped from her mouth, I pressed my face against the window. It was raining. No, pouring. I don't know how I didn't notice. Nick leaned over me, his expression crumbling. "When did it get dark?" Bobby nodded. "How long have we been on this bus?" Before I could answer, a portable TV screen in front of me lit up with a white screen which turned green, then yellow, flicking from color to color, flashing in my eyes. Nick snorted. "What the hell is this?" But he was watching the screen. Bobby too, like it was drawing them in, leeching onto their minds. Murmurs around the bus confirmed my classmates were equally confused. I squeezed my eyes shut at first, but I was overcome with an overwhelming sense of curiosity. I let my eyes flicker open, but as soon as my gaze landed on the screen, on flashing colors hitting in quick succession, a sharp pain rumbled in my right temple. The colors kept going. I remember the sequence perfectly. Red, yellow, blue, green, repeat. I don't know how long I was staring at the colors. I don't know how long my body was frozen, my eyes unblinking, but I could feel my body reacting. My mouth was open, unable to close. A thin sliver of drool running down my chin. There was something warm sliding from my nostril. I couldn't wipe it away. My body was stuck, like I was paralyzed, like I'd never move again. Next to me, Nick and Bobby were frowning at the colors, but unlike me, they could move. Bobby was blinking, trying to keep up with them. Nick slowly inclined his head, his lips muttering silent words I couldn't understand. And then, just like that, the screen flashed off. Bobby drew in a sharp breath and straightened in her seat. Nick blinked rapidly. I expected him to freak out, but he was strangely quiet. "Addie," Bobby's eyes found mine. "Your nose." Swiping gingerly at my nose with my bare arm, I let out a shuddery breath. We had to get out. Whatever the place was, it wasn't summer camp. I could hear hisses around me, at the back of the bus and the front, voices collapsing into white noise. When I risked turning my head, I spotted Serena Kyle with her hand pressed over her nose and mouth. She was doing a bad job of hiding the crimson stream flooding through her fingers. Suddenly, it felt like my world was crumbling in front of me. The two men started up the aisle, labeling each student. They held cans of spray paint like weapons, marking us with different colors. There were 3 colors, red, blue, and purple. When kids tried to protest, tried to make a run for it, they were cuffed and shoved back in their seats. There was so much screaming and fighting, I couldn't hear what the men with spray paint were saying. Nick grabbed my hand, and I grabbed Bobby's. When one of the men reached the kids in front of me, the front of their shirts were sprayed deep, dark blue. The man studied the 3 girls like they were pieces of meat. "These are all good." The girls he was talking about started talking over each other, but he blanked them. Blues will go into processing first, and purples will follow, if we can fix them. The man's words filled my mouth with phantom bugs. Addie? Bobby swiped at my nose, her eyes wide. What's going on? I had a feeling she wasn't talking about the spray paint. When the guard reached my seat, he sprayed a red circle on the front of my shirt. Red. That was new. I thought the guard was going to raise his hand to me, but instead he stuck his podgy fingers under the blood crusted under my nose. Defect, he said. What? He ignored me, moving on to Nick. Purple. Nick tried to pull off his shirt defiantly, only for the guard to slap him across the face. The man seemed to study my friend, before grabbing Nick by the scruff of his neck. Pending. He grumbled, his fingernails grazing over freckles dotted on my best friend's cheeks. I'm not the one who will make a final choice. You better be as bright as you seem in a good light, kid. Nick stumbled back, his gaze flicking to me. Run. But there was nowhere to run. Bobby shrieked when the man sprayed a blue circle on the front of her dress. I tried to stop him, but I was dragged by my hair, ragged like a wild animal. This one's good too, he yelled to the front. When the men were finished with the spray cans, we were told to file off the bus and join our respected color groups. Nick tried to fight a guard, only to be punched in the face. But he still tried again, swaying back and forth, screaming to be let go. When we tried to run, we were grabbed and thrown off the bus. I'm not sure how much time had passed. I was clinging on to my friends, and then they were pulled away. Nick and Bobby were treated like they mattered, forced into their color groups. I was shoved onto my knees in dirt which stained my legs. It was pouring, and my ponytail was plastered to my back. Other Reds were forced next to me. There were around 12 of us in total. I know that because I took snapshots of each of them. Not names, faces. Names hurt, so I remembered them by face. I remember Summer Forrest next to me. I remember dirt streaked down her face, blood dripping down her chin. That's what we all shared. The Reds. We had all suffered the same nosebleed, crimson streaking down our faces, mixing with the rain. The 12 of us were put in a line in the front of the bus, and when a woman in pristine white suit and red hair addressed us under the light of her flashlight, I looked past her and my gaze found our camp. Not a camp. There was no sign of a campsite, the type of thing I had expected all these years leading to my senior year. Instead, in front of us was a multi-story building. In the distance, groups of purple and blue were being escorted inside automatic doors, while we were left in the rain for hours. The sky turned light, and then dark, and we were made to wait. We could have been there for days. I lost all sense of time. I lost all sense of my own humanity. I knew why they were doing this to us, but I was in denial. I was in denial when 12 became 11, and then 10, then 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Summer was screaming, and I couldn't breathe. There were people in front of me. I knew them. I'd known them since childhood. Mr. Doherty, the guy who lived across the street with his poodle Gloria. Eve Simmons, who owned the diner. Nick, Bobby, and I had frequented for most of our lives. Mr. and Mrs. State, the elderly couple who brought over pudding when I was homesick from school. All I remember is waiting to follow the others, squeezing my eyes shut and screaming into the night. But then a warm hand was sliding into mine and pulling me to my feet. There was a gunshot and the sound of a body hitting the ground. Summer. I remember Nick pulling me away, but I'll never forget Summer Forrest's body lying in a heap, pooling red stemming around willowy blonde hair. I don't know how Nick got me away, but all I recall is tripping over my own feet. He dragged us into trees and undergrowth as branches scratched at my face, pulling at my hair, but I didn't care. When Nick finally turned around to look at me, I screamed. I screamed until he slammed his hand over my mouth, shutting me up. The last time I'd seen my best friend, he definitely had 2 eyes, both intact. Now one of them was hanging out like a cartoon. It was almost uncanny valley how inhuman he suddenly looked. Nicholas Castor was wearing what looked like torn hospital scrubs. The skin of his face had been scraped away, leaving bloody flaps of flesh where his cheeks used to be. His lips were swollen. Half of his hair looked sheared off, and yet somehow, part of him looked beautiful, or at least the start of beautiful. Nick had a jawline, but it was unfinished. Everything about him was incomplete. His mouth, full of veneers, were clumsy, like a psycho dentist had been playing with his teeth. It was hard to look at him. My friend had been mutilated. Nick spat a tooth into the dirt. "I got out," he managed to gasp out, his voice slurring. He slowly removed his hand from my mouth, shaking his head when I opened my mouth to speak. His smile was almost drunken. "It's okay. I got out. They had me on a ton of sedatives, so just bear with me." "Out?" I shrieked. "Out of where?" Nick held his eye inside the socket with one hand and held mine with the other. "Processing." The word rolled off his tongue. He stopped, like he was going to throw up. He threw a glance behind me, before spewing lumps of red through his fingers. "Yep, processing. The art of being processed." "What are you talking about?" Nick pulled me further into the trees, flattening us into the dirt. "That place," he gasped out. It's not a good place." I slapped him. I needed Nick to snap out of it. "Where is she?" I managed to squeak. "Where's Bobby?" Nick looked completely sober for a moment, blinking rapidly. He shook his head, and the fright of pain in his eyes sent my heart into my throat. His eyes were hollow, filled with darkness I could never and would never understand. Somehow I already knew I'd lost him. "We're going to die, Addie," Nick said in a half giggle. His eyes rolled to the back of his head, his body hitting the ground with a soft thump. Following his declaration, a blinding searchlight illuminated my face. "We've got movement," a female voice yelled. Taking 2 steps back, I ducked into the undergrowth. Whatever that place was, Bobby was in there. And Nick, a purple, was my only way of getting anywhere near that place. So, hoisting my unconscious friend onto my shoulder, I turned and ran. The most unsettling thing about this one is that none of the adults thought this was weird at all. Everyone treated turning these kids into perfect people like it was just any other day, another day in school. The next story for today is also from r/scary stories from user Donovan221. The Inheritance. Well, my parents died. Happens to all of us, I suppose, if you're lucky. They were old too, so I'm not too torn up about it. They lived happy lives together and died a mere 3 hours apart from one another. Still though, losing both parents in the same day, it's always gonna hurt. Those final goodbyes, the ones where you know that this is it, yeah, that's the hardest part. It makes all the memories come rushing back, forces your brain to run through every moment that it could recall being with that person. Feeling Mom's leathery, wrinkled hand wrapped so tightly around mine as she looked up at me with her old, beautiful brown eyes, I couldn't help but be brought back to childhood. She and Dad would walk side by side, with me in the middle, and they'd take each of my hands into one of theirs. I'll never forget the joy I'd feel when they'd swing me back and forth as we walked. I just felt so warm and at peace. I'd never had any siblings. I guess they decided one was enough. I can't say that affected me much, though, if anything, it meant more attention for me. Didn't have to share a room, didn't have to share a Christmas, and my birthday always felt like the most important day of the year. As I recollected, I could feel my mother's grip on my hand soften, and her eyes began to flutter. What followed was the most monotonous beep of a heart monitor, then silence broken only by nurses doing their jobs. Mom was gone, and Dad was fading quickly behind her. Literal soulmates. Seeing Dad in the state that he was in triggered more of those childhood memories, and my face became drenched in tears as I held his hand tightly. As the hours passed, eventually it seemed as though he wanted to speak, but what came out was merely a gasping wheeze that looked like it was physically paining him. He looked quietly devastated at my tears, and I assumed he just wanted to reassure me that everything would be all right. He lifted a weak finger towards the shelf at the far end of his room. "The shelf?" I asked in a quaking voice with a smile. He shook his head yes, and I walked over to the shelf. All that was there was a clipboard, clamping down some printer paper, as well as a pen that sat beside it. I picked it up, and Dad began to try to speak again, urging me to bring him the clipboard. I kinda cocked an eyebrow at this, but this was a man in his dying moments. I'm not going to tell my dad no, especially not now. With shaking hands, he began to write. It was heartbreaking seeing the pen tremble in his grasp as he struggled to write a single sentence. Slowly but surely, the words were etched into the page. Take care. Suddenly, my dad stopped. His face winced and curled into a pained expression as his heart monitor began to beep rapidly. Dad, no, I begged. Please, you can't leave me just yet, Dad. I'm begging you. Please, God, not yet. His eyes rolled over to meet mine, and a single tear crawled down the right side of his face as the heart monitor stretched out its final beep, and nurses filled the room once again. And that was that. Mom was gone, Dad was gone. Yet, here I was, still alive and forced to endure. I took Dad's paper. I saw it as his final goodbye. Take care, Donovan. That had to have been what he was trying to say. Everything will be okay, his voice called out in my head. Leaving the hospice room felt like my shoes were cinder blocks, and the walk to the exit seemed to take an eternity. I got in by car feeling empty. A void in my soul that couldn't be filled again, but, alas, life must go on. I had funerals to arrange. There was a bit of a shining light in the darkness, though, and that shining light came in the shape of my inheritance. It feels wrong now that I'm thinking about it, finding consolation in getting money because my parents died, but if they left it to me, it was mine. Over the course of their lives, my parents had purchased 3 properties, one here in town, a lake house a few cities over, and a 2-story townhouse back in their home state. At least, I thought it was 3. Apparently, they also owned a cabin up in the mountains about 50 or so miles out of town. They'd left each property to me, and from the very moment I found out, I made a quick decision that I was going to definitely be moving into that lake house for permanent residence. What? I deserve it. My parents died. Anyway, I'd never even heard them mention a cabin once in my entire life. Dad would take monthly hunting trips out to that area, though, so I guess that's where it came from. It took me a few weeks to get out there and take a look at the place. What with all the funeral arrangements and time it takes to want to even leave your bed after the death of a loved one, but I got out there nevertheless. Let me just say, the place was absolutely decrepit. I knew it had been a while since my dad had gone hunting, but this place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It was completely desolate, and vegetation had covered the entire front side of the cabin. The boards at the back looked like they were set to collapse at any given moment. A rickety porch swing lay at the front, suspended on one side by the chain that hadn't snapped yet. Pushing the door open, what hit me first was the smell. That sickly sweet smell of death that you'd find radiating off a decaying deer carcass on the side of the road. It ran through the front door and sucker punched me in the face, completely unexpected. Covering 90% of my face with my shirt, the next thing I noticed that knocked the wind out of me were the toys. Dozens of toys that were clearly made for little boys, no older than toddler age. So this is where Dad brought you, I thought aloud as I noticed one of my favorite teddy bears from when I was a kid. I searched for months for you, little Huckleberry. What I noticed next is what made me realize that something was incredibly wrong. Aside from my little Huckleberry, I didn't recognize any of these toys. I have a pretty strong memory. I think I'd remember at least some of this stuff, but no. I didn't recognize the clothes either. None of these 10 or so outfits that by this point had been tattered and weathered to shreds. They all just lay randomly sprawled across the floor of the cabin, covered in dirt and grime. As I explored further into the cabin, the smell of rot became more and more present until finally I found its source. In a huge pile in the corner of the kitchen area were dozens of rodent carcasses. Possums, squirrels, raccoons, they all looked like they had been completely mutilated. I stared at the disgusting pile until something hit me like a freight train. The possum at the very top of this pile, it looked fresh. Blood still trickled from what looked like a bite mark on its neck, and its feet twitched. All at once, the smell and gore became too much, and I began to get dizzy. I leaned over into the sink and started puking my guts up, shivering from the force. In between my heaves, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and that possum pretty much confirmed it for me. I felt my senses heighten in that raw, primal way, the kind of primal that helps a gazelle escape the crushing force of a crocodile bite before it can even happen. My ears perked up at the slightest foreign sound, and that sound just so happened to be creaking of the wooden floors in the cabin. Ever so slightly, I turned to where the sound was coming from. Peeking its head into the doorway, staring at me with this disgusting, childlike grin, was something that I could barely classify as human. Its limbs were elongated and blood dripped rhythmically from its mouth and rotting teeth. It had the body of a human, but something was just so wrong. Its stomach looked like it threatened to touch its spine, and it moved in jerky, erratic motions as it inched closer to me. When it was about 3 or so feet away from me, it stuck its hands out and smiled wider, causing me to fall backwards onto the mountain of dead animals. The thing didn't stop and continued inching towards me, arms outstretched as if it were slowly attempting to grab me. It was now less than a foot away from me as I cowered terrified against the kitchen wall. It was so close that I could feel its hot, disgusting breath blanketing my entire face with each breath. Suddenly, without warning, the thing reached down violently and grabbed each of my hands. It didn't hurt me, though. Instead, it just held my hands, stroking them gently. That's when I noticed something that made every puzzle piece fall into place. When it looked at me, it wasn't with malice. It looked at me with eyes that were painstakingly human. It looked at me with the same eyes that I'd seen on my mother as I held her hand in her last moments. Just as every little detail began to register in my mind, the thing started to speak in a broken, inhuman voice. "You take care of me." I like stories like this because the horror comes from the reveal. You spend the whole story thinking one thing, and then the last line's like, oh yeah, no, never mind. It's actually this completely different outcome that you couldn't have never imagined. The next story is also from r/scary stories from user Twisted Urban Tales. I left a group trip early. When my friends came back, something was very wrong. A couple of years ago, I saw a guy wearing a jester costume as I was walking home. It wasn't creepy, just very awkward. He was holding a stack of leaflets, trying to hand them to people who were clearly avoiding eye contact. It was too colorful and over the top. The whole thing just screamed try hard. I almost walked past him like everyone else, but then he stepped in front of me and held one out. Hey, step right in. The fun starts when you arrive at Blue Carnival Island, he said in a goofy voice. I frowned at him. Sorry, he said quickly, dropping the voice immediately. I know it looks weird. If I don't hit a sign-up quota, they'll make me wear the hat too. Damn, that's unfortunate. He cringed slightly. I looked down at the leaflet. Blue Carnival Island Experience, sponsored by... The logo of an energy company sat beneath the title. A holiday? I said. Yeah, he smiled, still a little embarrassed. Group trip package. Got flights, accommodation, the whole thing. It's actually, really good, to be honest. You don't sound convincing. I'm better when people don't look directly at me, he said with a grimace. Ruins the illusion. Then he smiled. Not a ridiculous smile this time, just normal. I laughed despite myself, and we continued talking on the street for longer than I expected. We started texting that night. His name was Matt, and he was very easy to talk to. At first, we just made jokes about the costume, then it turned into longer conversations. Hobbies, life, all sorts of stuff. A few days later, we met up again in town. He wasn't wearing the costume, and I couldn't help noticing he was actually pretty good looking without all the powder and makeup. We talked over lunch for a while, and as we were finishing up, he asked if I'd given any more thought to the trip. I do need to get paid. Remember, no pressure, he grinned. After a bit more banter, I finally asked him for the actual details, and he began explaining the arrangements. I get a bonus if the group stays together, he said at one point. That's, kind of their whole thing. He hesitated for a second. It's a structured experience. Probably just one of those all-inclusive trips where you meet new people and end up staying in the same hotel, I thought. A week later, I signed up. My friends Chloe and Tyler were coming too. I convinced them it would just be something we could post about after and laugh over drinks. When we arrived at the bus station, I was surprised to see about 60 of us, possibly more. There were families, couples, and a few older people. Matt arrived in full costume, bouncing between people, high-fiving kids and hyping everyone up. It all felt fun at the time. Then, when he caught my eye in that dumb costume again, he smiled in a way that made everyone else blur out for a second. "Sarah, you made it," he said when he got close. "Of course, I'm your best recruit." "Not even remotely true," he smirked, "but I'll pretend it is." Before boarding, he gathered everyone together. "All right, everyone, just one thing," Matt said, clapping his hands lightly. "When we get there, it's really important you stay with the group. Don't wander off on your own." "Why?" someone asked. He hesitated just for a second. Wouldn't want anyone getting lost. Everything was normal until Amsterdam. The flight to the island was delayed overnight. Matt handled it almost instantly, booking hotels, reorganizing transport, and keeping everyone calm. I had to admit, it was impressive, if anything. Chloe joked that he should quit and get a real job. He just laughed it off nonchalantly. At the hotel, everything felt like a temporary inconvenience. People were drinking in the lobby, making the best of it. I went to see Matt. His room was almost empty. There was no suitcase and no clothes scattered around, just a bag on the chair. "You sure travel light," I said. "I don't stay in one place long," he replied with a grin. I laughed at that, and we continued talking in his room until the sun went down. That night, I woke up to knocking on my hotel door. Loud, urgent. I blinked as I opened it, still half asleep. Matt was standing there, but not like before. No costume, and he wasn't smiling either. He looked pale and tense. "You need to leave," he said firmly. Something was very wrong. "What?" "I booked you on a flight. It leaves in an hour. You need to go now." He shoved a plane ticket in my hand. I just stared at him. "What are you talking about? What about everyone else?" "I'll handle it." "No, Matt, what's going on?" He stepped closer and looked in my eyes, shaking his head. "Sarah, I don't have time to explain. You just need to trust me." "Then tell Chloe and Tyler, I said I'll handle it." Silence. My heart pounded. He just looked at me like he was trying to memorize something. Then he kissed me. Not gently or slowly. Desperately. "Just please go," he said quietly. I wish I could say I argued with him and demanded answers, but I didn't. Something in his voice had changed. The easy, joking tone that he normally spoke with was replaced by a terrified urgency. I packed up quickly, hands shaking. The hotel room suddenly felt unfamiliar, and every sound in the hallway made me flinch. The airport felt too bright and normal when I went back in. I moved through it as fast as I could, checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for a message from Matt explaining what was going on. Nothing came. On the flight home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the door. He looked like he was trying to hold something back. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to figure out what he hadn't said. When I got home, my family asked me while I was back from the trip early. I told them I was feeling ill and decided to cancel. The easiest explanation. I texted Chloe and Tyler too, telling them the same thing. For a moment, I worried they wouldn't reply, my mind jumping to worst-case scenarios. But then both of them messaged back a day later, telling me to get better soon. Chloe texted again after a few days. "Made it. Island was amazing. You missed out. Hope you're feeling better now." I was confused. Everything seemed normal after they got back. But the look on Matt's face that night certainly wasn't. For a while, I just let it sit. I didn't really know what to make of it. Matt and I stopped texting after that night, and I didn't reach out either. I wouldn't have known what to say even if I tried. Chloe and Tyler kept asking me about Matt, but I brushed it off every time. They probably thought we had an argument in the hotel or something of that sort. I don't know how to explain what really happened there, so I didn't. Then a few weeks later, something began to feel off about Chloe. Not enough to point at, just small things. She laughed at the wrong moments and forgot details she shouldn't have. I only noticed because I'd known her for years. Tyler's change was more noticeable. He was still him, just quieter and flatter in general. At one point, I mentioned something that had happened years ago, something all three of us had been there for. Chloe hesitated, then smiled and said, "Oh yeah, that." But it wasn't right. It wasn't how she used to remember things. But I couldn't put my finger on it, so I tried to disregard it and moved on. The weeks passed, then months. Nothing felt too out of the ordinary, at least. Nothing I could point out yet. Until one night at Chloe's. We were in her kitchen, cooking like we used to. She was talking about something, but I wasn't really listening. I was watching her. I'd caught myself doing that a lot lately, looking for something I couldn't quite name. Then, mid-sentence, she faltered. Just slightly at first. She repeated a word, like she'd lost her place. Then, her eyes rolled back. Not naturally. Not like someone fainting or blinking too hard. They spun, fast and unnatural, until there was nothing but white. For a second, that's all I could see. 2 blank whites staring straight through me. I screamed. And then, just like that, they snapped back. She blinked a few times, looking confused. "Sarah, oh my gosh, are you okay?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I took a step back without meaning to. I stopped myself. What was I supposed to say? After a few moments, she laughed it off, said she felt dizzy for a second, low blood sugar or something. Everything seemed normal again, so I nodded and pretended to accept it. Then we went back to cooking. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking because I knew I hadn't imagined it, and deep down I already knew there was only one person who could explain it. I called Matt that night. It had been months since that night in the hotel, and I was surprised he even answered. At first, he avoided it, tried to brush it off, asked if I was sure or if maybe I'd just been tired. But there was something in my voice that gave me away. After a pause, he sighed. "Can we meet?" he said. "I'll explain properly." He came over later that evening. No small talk, no easing into it. The second he stepped inside, I turned to him. What happened on that island? He sat down and didn't answer straight away, but when he did, his voice was calm. Too calm. "Do you believe there are other versions of you, Sarah?" he asked. "Not really." I mean, yeah, who would believe that? No. "That's fair," he said. "Most people don't." He looked at me. "But there are versions where your life goes differently, depending on what decisions you make, right?" "Sure," I nodded. He took a breath and continued. "Some changes are small. You might end up with a different haircut. Others are bigger. You might live in a different place." I frowned but kept listening. "And some of those versions of you are not okay." My blood ran cold. "They're suffering," he continued, "in ways you can't imagine." "Matt, why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what I did." "What you did?" He met my eyes. "The island. It's where they switch people." Silence. I waited for the punchline, but there was none. "The version of you that goes there doesn't come back." I swallowed. That is not funny. But his face was dead serious. Silence stretched between us again. "Then, where are they?" I finally said, quieter. "Somewhere worse. Much worse." "And the people who come back?" I whispered. "They're from those other places. And not just any of those places. They're the versions of you that have suffered the most." "No. They take different versions of them from other timelines," he continued, "and swap them. Then they replace their memories so it all fits." "That's insane." "I know." He didn't sound fazed at all. I stood there, frozen, still trying to process all of it. "But why?" He paused and looked away for a second, like he was deciding how much to say. "Because every time it happens, it generates energy," he said. "A lot of it. More than anything else they've found." "And you what, work for them?" He nodded. "Why would you tell me this?" My voice cracked. "Because I couldn't send you there." That hit harder than anything else. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding it in for a long time. "I wasn't always part of this," he said. "I was on a trip to Thailand a few years back. Backpacking. One night I got taken. Wrong place, wrong time. No idea who they were. I just remember the pain, the blood, the screaming. It went on for weeks, every day from morning till night." He paused, as if recalling the horror of it. "And then one day it just stopped," he continued. "Not gradually. All of the sudden it was just gone, and I woke up somewhere else, clean, no injuries or pain." "Where?" I asked quietly. A facility, he said. Rooms full of people. They were unconscious, lying on beds. Thought it was a hospital at first. He shook his head. One of the staff came over and explained it like it was nothing. Said those people were being processed. Their memories were being replaced so they'd match the versions of themselves from this world. I stared at him. They told me what had happened, he went on. That I'd been switched. The version of me that belonged here had gone to the island for the holiday. I took his place. My throat felt dry. And they just told you that? They didn't care if I believed it, he said. They gave me a choice. He paused briefly. I could have my memories replaced like those people, live this version of my life like nothing ever happened, or I could keep my memories and know the truth. And you chose, I began. I chose to remember, he said, but it came with a condition. He rubbed his forehead. I had to work for them, he continued. Recruitment, minimum of 10 people every cycle. Why you? I asked the same thing, he said. They said I scored high on emotional intelligence and communication, and that I was mentally stable enough to function after what I'd been through. He gave a humorless smile. Apparently, that's rare. A chill ran through me. What I'd once found so endearing and real, his awkwardness, the way he stumbled over words, I couldn't help but question how much of it had actually been real. And if you don't, I asked. If I don't meet the quota, he said, I'm fired. That means they wipe my memories, replace them with ones from the version that was here, the one who was sent to Thailand in my place. Silence settled between us. So either I do this, he said quietly, or I let them take it all away and go back to not knowing any of this, like your friends. Then it all came rushing back. Chloe hesitating over memory she should have known instantly. Tyler reacting just a second too late. All the little things I'd try to ignore. Because they didn't make sense on their own, but together they did. They weren't them. I was looking at something wearing their faces, carrying their memories, while the real Tyler and Chloe had been sent somewhere far worse. It was my fault. I had convinced them to go. And if Matt hadn't told me to leave that night, that would have been me too. A cold, sinking feeling settled in my chest as another thought followed it. If you don't meet the quota, I said slowly, then your memories are replaced. That would make me the only one left who knew. And even then, would it matter? I only believed Matt because of everything I'd seen. The way that night played out, the look on his face, and the things I noticed afterward. The way Chloe's eyes went completely white. I thought about trying to explain all of this to anyone else. My family, the fake Chloe and Tyler, anyone at all, but I already knew how it would sound. Insane. No one would believe me. I looked at him. How many people? I asked quietly. How many have been switched? I don't know, he said. Then he looked back at me. But it's more than you think. That was the last time we really talked about it like that. After a while, it stopped being something we discussed and preferred to avoid. Life went on, and eventually, we got together. If I'm being honest, I didn't feel safe anymore without him. He was the only one who understood what had happened, the only one who knew. Nowadays, we still go to work, see friends, make plans. We still do everything we did before. I still see him come home in that jester costume, but it doesn't look ridiculous or even remotely funny anymore. Sometimes things start to feel normal again. I think we both try to believe that. As long as he meets that sales quota, which he always does, nothing changes. He's still my Matt, the same Matt I met that night handing out flyers, and he'll keep meeting it. He has to. I can confidently say that even to this day, and I read this story a while back, that I've never read a story that, how do I even say that? I've never read a story that threatens your own reality like this one did. The next story is from r/scary stories from Trash Tia. They finally found a cure for bullying. A year ago, Crystal Schuyler, a well-known celebrity streamer, took her own life in front of 50,000 viewers after detailing her harassment. Her video went viral, parents across the nation coming to a grim conclusion. Their children were corrupted, poisoned, evil, and needed to be fixed. So a streamer died, and we were all paying the consequences. Officially, it was called the Social Alignment Program, created for the sole purpose of smoothing us down, removing the parts of us that judged, that looked down on people, that insisted on hierarchy. Crystal's video didn't just go viral, it gave the government an incentive to cut out bullying once and for all. Literally. I really didn't want a detailed explanation of what the procedure involved, but it was law to explain it to a child. So I was forced to sit through half an hour of quirky government-sponsored YouTube videos featuring influencers telling me that my brain was going to be cut open. The thing was, I never bullied anyone. I did tease kids. I called Jesse Harlow a stuck-up bitch in 8th grade. I shoved Sam Holland into a classroom because my friends thought it was funny, but I wasn't, right? Bullying was worse. Bullying wasn't me. I judged my peers, yes, but we all did. Once we were self-aware, we immediately began judging everything around us. I judged myself. I judged my parents, my siblings, my teachers. I laughed at their stupid hair, their lisps, the way they spoke slowly, their clothes, if their parents weren't rich, their phones, if they didn't have the latest model. But wasn't that what being a kid was? Wasn't bullying just natural? Sitting in an uncomfortable chair, my wrists were gently pinned down. The room was clinical white. The chair was ice cold. Uncomfortable leather. I didn't like it. The device was kind of like a halo. It descended from the ceiling and settled over my skull, coming apart like a vice and gripping my entire head. My reflection in the equipment mirror stared back at me, a trembling 17-year-old trying to stay calm. Allison, the nurse gestured for me to lean forward and rest my chin on another piece of equipment, placing my head between spinning metal structures, a blinding white light piercing my right eye. I wasn't alone. Across the room, a boy sat cross-legged on an observation bed, arms folded. I recognized him. He used to push kids into lockers and threaten teachers. Whenever a nurse came near him, he started screaming. "I have rights," he kept repeating in an almost hysterical giggle. "You can't do this to me, because I have rights." Smoothing was mandatory, so whether he liked it or not, it was going to happen. He shot me a disgusted glare, lip curled like I willingly slumped into the murder chair. Like I wasn't held at gunpoint and dragged to the procedure room. The boy was panicking, sweat clinging to his head, thick glued over his eyes. I watched him dive off the observation bed, sprinting out of the room while his nurse filled an IV. Part of me cheered him on. The rest of me thought he was a moron. I tried extremely hard not to notice them thrumming to life. Foam discs immediately pressing pressure against my temples. "Okay, Allison, can you look straight forward, please?" The nurse instructed from behind a pale blue mask. I pretended I couldn't see her smug smile in the folds. "Directly at the bright flash, and try not to blink, all right? You're doing so well, sweetie, so brave." I couldn't choke back my cry, my eyes stinging, the bright light pulsing. "I want my mom," I whispered, trying to pull my head back, but my skull was already stuck between thrumming metal. "Please." I gave up trying to be brave, trying to accept it. My entire body trying to fling me backward. "Let me go," I screamed, thrashing at Velcro restraints, pinning my wrists. "Let me go. I want to go home. I want to go home right now." All of the anger, the agony, the frustration at my parents ignited, exploding from my mouth in a vicious string of incomprehensible word barf. Mom didn't want me to have the procedure. She thought it would kill me. Dad said he wanted me to have it. He refused to have a bully for a daughter. "Relax, Allison," the nurse cooed from behind the structure. "We're almost there." Her voice faded in and out as sharp pain scratched the back of my head. Deeper, like it was digging through my brain, picking me apart piece by piece. "Why don't we talk about your favorite thing, huh? Children undergoing alignment tend to respond better when they're engaged." I swallowed thickly, and that sharp scratch became a lightning bolt rattling my skull. I could no longer blink, my body paralyzed. "Allison," the nurse hummed. "Can you try to say something?" Another pulsing light erupted in front of my eyes. "Speak, Allison," the nurse instructed. "We need to know the smoothing has been successful." I blinked again, sensation flooding back, but not normal sensation. The machine crushing my skull was barely an afterthought. The giant needle sticking into the back of my head didn't feel real. "Yes," I said, and the machine was turned off. I was free, the metal structures prying from my temples. The nurse gently led me back to the chair. I didn't feel cold anymore. I didn't really feel like anything. The nurse wore a wide smile, tying a bracelet around my wrist. Her gloved hands were still covered in my blood. That's just to tell your parents you've had the procedure, she hummed, shoving paperwork in my face. You may experience side effects, but they'll wear off in the next 24 hours. Nausea and vomiting are common after the smoothing, but do come back to us if you experience any of the following: nosebleeds, headaches, and using sudden profanity and expletive language. I nodded, smiling. Yes, thank you. The nurse grinned back. No, thank you. She ruffled my hair. Don't you feel so much better, Allison? I strode toward the door, pulled it open, and accidentally trapped my finger in the hinge. The nurse turned pale, her eyes widening. Oh my goodness, she stared at my throbbing thumb. I knew the pain was there, I knew it existed, but I was numb. Strange. Foggy thoughts. I should have screamed. I should have cried, but I was fine. The nurse pulled back her mask. Allison, are you all right? Yes, I said, smiling again. I'm fine. I was fine. Everything was fine. I walked home in the rain, but I didn't feel it soaking through my clothes. Mom threw away all the paperwork I gave her and slapped me across the face. You're no daughter of mine, she snarled, like I was a stranger, prodding the bandage around my skull. You're a shell of her. That was fine. Days collapsed into a blur of nothing. Hours, minutes, days, weeks, months. My bedroom ceiling was gray when I opened my eyes. The sky was gray. Flowers were gray. Ice cream tasted like cardboard. Looking at someone was gray. Talking to them in gray. Every time Mom insulted and screamed at me was gray. When I visited my aunt, she showed me a picture of a political figure, laughing. Oh my God, look at the state of his hair. I wasn't sure why she was laughing. To me, the person looked fine. The world grew silent. In class, every student sat and listened and kept their heads down. The teachers called us well-behaved angels. At lunch, the same boy from the procedure room bumped into me in the cafeteria. Sorry, he smiled. I noticed the bandage wrapped around his head, burns staining his temples, half-lidded, unblinking eyes. He was still trembling. The trauma of the procedure affecting his body while his mind was a vacant nothing. That was my fault. It's okay, I said, and walked away. Then I bumped into him again, outside the girls' bathroom. Sorry, he smiled. That was my fault. I smiled back. It's okay. And then the next day, heading to gym class, he shouldered past me a little harder, elbowing me in the eye. Pain struck. Nuclear pain. Real pain that was so real, so visceral, my legs gave way, sending me crashing to the floor, my mouth opening, a raw screech suffocating my throat. I swallowed it down like vomit. Blinking back dancing lights flashed behind my eyelids. I managed to glimpse him through flickering lashes and caught a single flash of color among the suffocating grayscale. I never realized his nose was bleeding. Sorry, the boy apologized as usual, but he didn't walk away this time. I stood, I blinked. The world was still gray, still dull. It's okay, I smiled. Oh, really? The boy's lip curled slightly, one brow raised. Again, color exploded, vivid and beautiful. The most beautiful shade of red decorated his lips and chin. He wound his fist back and swung it directly into my face. I screamed this time. Numbness became freeing. Feeling became sensation. Sensation became emotion, and this time, pain was glorious, filthy, agonizing. Blood ran from my own nose, hot and wet. So wet, I traced each rivulet sliding down the curve of my throat. The boy stepped in front of me, lips curved, nostrils flaring. His eyes were different, frenzied, flicking back and forth. Are you okay? His voice held an unmistakable tone of mockery. I straightened up, swiping blood from my face with my sleeve. It's fine, I said, smiled, and then realized I was grimacing. I'm fine. I turned to walk away, a dull, throbbing pain striking the back of my head, and he shoved me, again, harder. Something ignited in my bones, my thoughts short-circuiting. It was right and wrong, and feral, twisting my stoic lips into a scowl. Prick. The name spluttered from my lips in a hiss, carried by blood filling my mouth, and then I couldn't stop myself. I gagged my mouth, but my lips were already moving, already in control. Watch where you're going. Something hot drew me to him, my body twitching. Are you blind? He smiled. I shoved him, choking on hysterical giggles. You look like a toe. He punched me in the face again. I enjoyed the sting. I enjoyed the way my head swung back, my jaw clicking out of place. I enjoyed the blood running down my face. I hate your ponytail, he spat, giggling. Somehow I was nose to nose with him, my skin on fire, my breath stuck in my throat. Something hot and rich filled my nose, intoxicating me. Well, I hate your face, I snapped back, reveling in his breaths tickling my face. You're a little twerp. He grinned. Oh yeah? I wrapped my arms around his waist, pulling him closer. I ran my lips across his neck, a shiver sliding down my spine. Yeah, I said, and ripped his throat out, but his teeth were already piecing mine. His giggles were muffled, manic, as he burrowed into me, and a part of me, this feral, animalistic part of me, squealed in delight. His blood running down my throat, his flesh stuck between my teeth. They should have just gotten us counseling. This story was so creepy. I love this story. Yeah. One day when they're eventually like, the kids have watched too much TikTok, let's take part of their brain away. That's when we've failed. That's when society has failed. The next one's from r/scary stories from user MadHatter006. Take a walk with me. I want to chat with you. I want to tell you how I got away with murder. Do you love your family? Do you really? Think about it. Take a moment and walk with me. Family is forever. Family is a group of people that are supposed to love, guide, and protect you. So many people have said. Family is bound to you for eternity by blood. With how many people that had to come together to make you? Just you. You're drowning in blood, sweetie, and so am I. My family was on a different level of messed up. My father was a car salesman who got high off crack cocaine and screwed his coworker. Smiling in the faces of his neighbors who whisper about his sexuality behind his back, while he's thinking he has everyone fooled. Idiot. My mother wasn't innocent. In fact, she was worse than my dad. To everyone else, she was the unassuming second-grade teacher who went to church every Sunday and attended a book club with her friends. Liar. She was horrible. A righteous bitch who would get friendly with her brother after her husband went to sleep. Beat me with her precious brown leather Bible in hand whenever I took too long doing the dishes. She would lock me in the basement for hours and hours. She once left me in there from the crack of dawn to the middle of the night. And when she let me out, she smiled in my face and told me, I honestly forgot you were there. I begged for food, but she told me it was too late to cook, and she shouldn't have to waste food on me. Waste. My older brother got the better treatment from my family. My father and mother didn't beat him like they would beat me. They didn't starve him like they would starve me. He stayed in his room on his computer, shirtless sometimes while he talked smoothly to some man or woman on the other side of his camera. The money he got for his cam sessions got him weed, white rum, and a car that he didn't have the license for. Bought secondhand from a friend from somewhere in Chicago. Regardless of the law, he would take it out on practice. He didn't care for my curled up, screaming, and scared self, who he threw into the trunk of his car. He would drive around for hours and speed up when he saw a speed bump in the road. Then laugh as he heard me cry in pain. That's how I broke my arm. This was all before I turned 7, just so you have a better image of how messed up this story gets. Are you ready? It was a cool Tuesday afternoon. My backyard was covered in leaves. Orange, yellow, red. I had just turned 15 and it was the middle of autumn. I was alone as I sat on the back porch steps. Not just alone on the steps, but there was no one else home. It was so peaceful. The kind of peace you wish would never go away. But good things never last long, do they? I could hear my mother's heels clicking up the sidewalk as she got to the house. Her loud laughter let me know she was on the phone, and she only ever genuinely liked talking to one person on the phone. My uncle. With her keys jingling in the lock, it was such a smooth transition for me to close the back door and hop up to my room. My house had no pictures. The walls weren't ever decorated with anything, and I always smelled of something foul. No one in this house ever thought to make memories. Everyone was too busy trying to forget. But forget what? It's not like they've been suffering. I've been the lightning rod for them as long as I've been breathing, but there's no pity for me. Just abuse. Passing my brother's room, it now had the permanent smell of weed and burnt rubber. I made sure to move quickly and quietly when I passed his room. His attention on me was never good, as I've learned over the years. How do you explain to someone that you've created tactics to move around your own house, just so you won't have to be noticed by your family, all for the sake of your own safety, your life? How do you explain that? You can't, or at least that's what you're taught when you're young. Your mother scolding you for tattling and telling you to keep your mouth shut. Whatever happens in the family stays in the family. Snitches get stitches, my brother would say. I hated my brother. I would always have to escape to my room whenever they came home. I would always have to hide, listening carefully at the door for anyone in the hall so I could run to the bathroom without being noticed. Watching which floorboard I stepped on at night on my way to the kitchen. Sleeping with my alarm clock under my pillow to get an earlier start so I could avoid everyone else. Taking showers at the break of dawn where everyone was still too deep in sleep to be disturbed by the sound of spraying water. When they were home, there was no such thing as peace, but I'll get to the point. That Tuesday night was the night that my worldview changed entirely. Humans are naturally wired for survival. You do what you must to keep breathing, but you can only handle so much before you snap. My mother had decided to throw a party. It started from the middle of the afternoon and went on into the late night. My father, mother, and brother all sat in the living room with our neighbors, and looking at them, you could almost trick yourself into believing they were perfectly normal. They laughed, smiling politely, and entertained their guests as everyone drank and ate gross goat cheese on saltine crackers. But of course, I knew better. My father wasn't fooling anyone with that long sleeve he was wearing. He was trying to hide the point of entry, all while looking sleep-deprived and waifish. The veins at the side of his forehead were bulging with the need to run to the bathroom and just do one more line. To get through the evening and I'll quit. My mother's liver was going out. She was once skinny with gentle curves, like a supermodel if she twisted her body in the mirror long enough to fool herself. Now she was as bloated as a whale. None of her clothes fit, and she had to go out and buy a new wardrobe. My uncle's sitting next to her, but he entertained her neighbor from next door instead, laughing flirtatiously and laying his hand on her knee. Our neighbor flirted back with him, tossing her hair over her shoulder and batting her lashes. Our neighbor was married to a Marine, and my brother, sitting with his friends, all drinking beer and talking as if they had nothing to talk about. None of them had jobs, none of them had families to take care of, none of them had shit to do with their lives except mooch off their parents. They could only talk about memories from high school, which quickly got them bored. Then they were reduced to only sitting in silence while everyone else talked to them about their own lives. I sat in my room, avoiding them all. Those idiots, sadists, adulterers, and liars. Every one of them is the next person's paramour in one way or another. By the time the party had died, it was 12 o'clock. I knew it wouldn't be a good night based on how hard my mother stomped up the steps. I saw from my window, my uncle escaping to my neighbor's house, his hand on her butt as she giggled drunkenly. My mother has fell out of favor. Funny. She screamed my name and demanded that I come down and clean up her mess. Moving down the hall to my room, it was like a horror movie, her slow steps moving closer and closer to my door. My arms folded over the windows as I took in the cold night air. I can still remember the feel of the wind on my face. My door was thrown open by my mother. Her long hair hanging in front of her face as she desperately held on to her wine glass. She stumbled and swayed in the doorway. Her eyes couldn't even find me. She yelled for me to come down and clean up her mess again. My brother yelling from his room for her to shut up. As I looked at her, as I watched her, I got this strange feeling. A feeling that could only be described as sadistic, but also empty at the same time. It was like a dying candle in the wind, a wind that just kept on coming. Her eyes found mine, and she stumbled into the room as she took a sip from her wine glass. She called my name, and when I didn't respond, that began an onslaught of insults and threats. The same insults and threats that I've heard for all of the time I had been under her care. It wasn't anything new. Her mocking, taunting, vicious insults were nothing new to me anymore. The wind stopped and the light on the candle flickered back to life, with plenty of wax left. It was like a wave of clean fresh water was thrown on me. I stood up, my eyes scanning her blubbery form from her heel to the crown of her head. She did just the same, mocking me as the wine in her glass sloshed around, provoking me with her words. My brother screamed from his room for both of us to be quiet. Fine, I'll make her be quiet. I lunged quickly, pushing her onto the floor. Her size betrayed her. She was too big now to move quickly. She struggled to stand as I calmly walked to my bedroom door and locked it. Her wine glass had fell out of her hand, and the cup broke. The smell of Riesling coated the dull brown carpet, mixing in evenly with the foul smell of the house. One tall shard of glass laid near my feet. I picked it up and made my way over to my mother. The candle was burning bright now that the wind had finally stopped. An easy slit across her throat prevented her from screaming, too. The shard cut my own fingers as I made myself into a butcher for my pig of a mother. I had felt this wave of ease come over me as I stood over her now mutilated body. I heard my brother's door open. With every step he took to get to my room, memories flashed behind my eyelids. His abuse and torment, his cruelty, every step brought a new memory back, and soon enough he was banging at my door. There weren't enough steps to match how many times he'd broken my arm or fractured my ribs. There weren't enough steps to match how many hours a day I'd spend in the darkness of his trunk. I'd remember the summer, in the darkness, him zooming over a speed bump, me hitting my head and blacking out. He threw me on the front lawn when we got home. Didn't even bother to take me inside, but instead left me under the bleeding hot sun. Watching as my mother's body emptied out her blood, soaking into the carpet as her face is fitted perfectly in a look of pain and fear. Strangely enough, it's the prettiest she's ever looked. My brother continued to bang on the door, banging continuously, and demanded that I open the door. So I did. And I delivered the same gruesome death to him too, a slit across his throat. But instead of cutting him open, I beat him until every bone I could get to break was broken, stomping on his arms and legs hard with my foot. I'd taken a page from his book and aimed for the most vital areas. The wind stayed down. I dragged the shard of glass on the wall, cutting into the dirty blue wallpaper. Then I noticed something. I didn't hear my father come up the steps, nor did he complain about the noise my mother was making. I searched the house for him, just to see if he was even home, passing through the living room that was messy with cheap wine and gross snacks. Pillows thrown about and furniture moved across the room to make space for a dance area. I saw the guest bathroom light on. The door was cracked open and I could see a shadow. I got close to the bathroom and saw the dirty brown loafers my father wore. Then his legs that were stretched out in front of him that almost peeked out the door. Pushing open the door, I saw his body laying there against the sink. A lighter sat bent by his knee, a burnt spoon in one hand and a syringe still jammed in his left arm. His tie was laying crumpled up next to the lighter, and he wasn't breathing. It was bound to happen sooner or later. How convenient that it should be now. I left him there. The state of his own demise should be left alone. It's the only thing he had in his final moments, weakness and addiction. I made my way out the open back door, kicking it closed with my foot, walking around the side of the house as I wiped off my fingerprints from the shard of glass. I made my way over to the neighbor's house. She didn't even have the decency to close her living room curtains. You could probably guess what was happening there. If she only knew where this pig had been before. I threw the shard of glass into her rose bushes and continued on down the sidewalk. I'm sure you're wondering now what happened. Did the police find me? Where did I run to? Do I feel guilty? Sweetheart, it made national news. It was everywhere. A brother had killed his sister and her entire family after a night of partying with her neighbors. The weapon was found in the rose bushes of a neighbor's of his sister's just across the street from the house they were murdered in. Both their faces were plastered on the 5 o'clock news. He pled his innocence, but texts between him and his sister were leaked and their incestuous relationship was revealed to the public. The neighbor wasn't off the hook either. The police guessed he killed them out of rage and jealousy sometime after the party and went to go make a victim of the adulterous neighbor lady. It's amazing how easily people can be fooled. It's also amazing how easily someone can obtain a fake ID, a fake birth certificate, and a fake passport. Cutting hair is easy as well. Isn't that what people do anyways when they want to feel like a new person? Now for the last question. Do I feel guilty? No. Absolutely not. In fact, during the whole ordeal, from pushing my mother to the floor to walking off into the night, the only thing I could feel was relief. It's the feeling of being raised in a cage and then finally breaking free. Sweet, sweet freedom. So no, I don't feel the slightest bit guilty. Never even for the neighbor lady who made a stupid decision and cheated with the wrong man. I do not feel guilty. Besides, if you had the chance to kill your demons, I'm sure you would do the same. You're already drowning in blood. What's the difference if you spill more? This person just had bad luck for the situation they were born into, which is absolutely terrible. And the most unsettling part of this story isn't that, she murdered her family and framed it on somebody else. It's that she was treated so poorly. But yeah, no, the murder part doesn't help its case. Anyways, here's the next one. It's from r/snowsleep from user Wisto. If your delivery driver says he forgot your drink, don't open the door again. I know how stupid this sounds because I used to read posts like this and think the same thing. Just don't open the door. Call the police. Just get out. That is what I normally say, guys. You never realize how useless all those thoughts are until you're standing barefoot in your hallway at midnight, holding a kitchen knife in one hand and your phone in the other, listening to someone breathe on the other side of your front door. It started with Thai food. I had just moved into my new apartment 3 weeks earlier. Nothing dramatic. No haunted backstory, no weird old building with a caretaker who warned me about the basement. Just a normal second-floor apartment above a row of shops. The kind of place where the hallway always smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and someone else's dinner. I'd moved there after my breakup with Lewis. We had been together for 4 years. He wasn't dangerous or evil or anything like that. He was just useless in that quiet, exhausting way that makes you feel like you're raising a grown man. When he finally left, I felt sad for about a week and then mostly relieved. For the first time in a long time, this place was mine. My mugs in the cupboard, my clothes in the wardrobe, my music playing without him asking if we could put something else on. That night, I got home late from work. It had been raining all day and my shoes were soaked through. I didn't have the energy to cook, so I ordered from the Thai place down the road. Green curry, jasmine rice, spring rolls, and a Diet Coke. The app said 25 minutes. I changed into pajamas, washed my face, and sat on the sofa scrolling through my phone. I remember feeling almost peaceful. That's the part that bothers me now. How normal it all was. How close I came to having an ordinary, boring night. At 10:43, my buzzer went. I pressed the intercom. Hello? Delivery. His voice was soft, youngish maybe, hard to tell through the speaker. Second floor, flat 6. I know, he said. I frowned at that, but only for a second. Drivers get the flat number on the app. Obviously, he knew. I buzzed him in and waited by the door. A minute later, there was a knock. When I opened it, he was standing too close. That was the first thing I noticed. Most delivery drivers step back after knocking. This one was right there, almost filling the doorway. He wore a black raincoat with the hood up and one of those thermal delivery bags over his shoulder. I couldn't see much of his face, just his mouth and a bit of stubble. Aaron? He asked. That's me. He handed me the bag. Enjoy your food. Thanks. I took it and was about to close the door when he said, Sorry, I forgot your drink. I looked into the bag. Curry, rice, spring rolls, no Diet Coke. It's fine, I said. Don't worry about it. I've got it downstairs. Honestly, it's fine. I'll bring it up. Before I could answer, he turned and walked away. I closed the door and locked it. I don't know why I locked it so quickly. Maybe because he'd stood too close. Maybe because he had said my name like he already knew me. Maybe because I live alone now, and living alone changes the sound of every small thing. I put the food on the coffee table and tried to shake it off. The curry was hot, the rice was still steaming, and for a few minutes I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. Then I found the receipt. It was folded under the spring rolls. Not the restaurant receipt, that was stapled to the outside of the bag. This was a plain white slip of paper, torn badly at one edge. At first, I thought it was just some kitchen note that had fallen in by accident. Then I saw my name. Aaron M., flat 6, lives alone, no dog. Chain lock only, bedroom window faces service alley, usually home after 7. I stared at it for a long time. My first thought was Lewis. It had to be Lewis. Some pathetic attempt to scare me, to make me call him, to make me feel like I still needed someone. It sounded exactly like the sort of thing he would think was clever after a few drinks. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the 5th ring. What? Did you send me something? What? Don't play dumb. Did you send someone to my flat? There was a pause, then a tired sigh. Aaron, it's nearly 11. I got a note in my takeaway. What note? One that says I live alone. Another pause. This one felt different. Are you serious? Yes. Where are you? In my flat, obviously. Lock your door. It is locked. No, properly lock it. That annoyed me. Even then, like he was suddenly the sensible one. I have locked it. Send me a picture. I almost told him to piss off, but I took a photo of the note and sent it. He called back 10 seconds later. That wasn't me. His voice had changed. He sounded awake now. Lewis, I swear on my mother, that wasn't me. Call the police. Before I could answer, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft knocks. Not loud, not aggressive, just polite. I stood in the middle of my living room with the phone against my ear. Aaron, Lewis said. Another knock. Then the delivery driver's voice. Forgot your drink. I didn't move. Lewis kept saying my name, but he sounded far away. The driver knocked again. I can leave it here if you want. I walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No delivery driver, no drink, nothing. I stepped back. My phone buzzed in my hand. A notification from the delivery app. Your driver is at your door. I looked at the peephole again. Empty hallway. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I don't know why I answered. I think my brain was still trying to make sense of it, still trying to turn it into something normal. Hello? The delivery driver said. You shouldn't have looked at the receipt. I couldn't speak. You were meant to eat first, he said. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor and the call stayed connected. I could hear his breathing through the speaker. Then the handle moved, slowly. Down, then up. Down, then up. I had locked the door, but he was testing it gently, like he didn't want to make too much noise. I picked up the phone and ended the call. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. Then I called 999. The operator asked what service I needed. Police, I whispered. What's happening? There's someone outside my flat. Are you in immediate danger? Yes, I think so. Is your door locked? Yes. Can you see the person? I looked through the peephole again. Empty hallway. No, I said, but he's there. As soon as I said it, the letterbox lifted. Just a little. A black gap opened near my knees. I stumbled back. The operator asked me what had happened. He opened the letterbox. Do not approach the door, he said. Go into a room with a lock if you can. My bathroom had a lock. It was cheap and flimsy, but it was something. I grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen drawer and backed toward the bathroom. The letterbox clicked shut. Then the knocking started again. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. Aaron, he called. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bath with the knife on my lap. The operator kept talking to me, calm and steady, asking questions I could barely answer. My address, my name, whether I had seen a weapon, whether there was another way into the flat. No, I said, just the front door. Then I remembered the note. Bedroom window faces service alley. My bedroom window. The one I had opened earlier because the flat smelled of paint and damp clothes. I stood so fast, the knife clattered into the bath. What is it? The operator asked. My bedroom window. Is someone trying to get in? I don't know. Stay where you are if the bathroom door locks. The problem was, from the bathroom, I couldn't see the bedroom. I couldn't see the hallway. I couldn't see anything. The flat went quiet. That was worse than the knocking. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the operator breathing through my phone and my own heart hammering in my ears. Then, my bedroom door creaked. I had left it open. I knew I had. But I heard it creak. The sound was slow and careful. The sound of someone touching the door with their fingertips and pushing it wider. "He's inside," I whispered. The operator said police were close. Close didn't mean inside the flat. Close didn't mean between me and him. A floorboard moved in the hallway, then another. He was walking toward the bathroom. I picked the knife back up and stood behind the door. My legs felt weak. I remember thinking I was going to die in pajamas, which is a stupid thing to think, but it was there in my head. I was going to die barefoot, in old pajamas with Thai food cooling on the coffee table. The bathroom handle dipped. Once, twice. Then his voice came through the door. "You should have taken the drink." I covered my mouth with my hand. He laughed quietly. "I'm not angry," he said. "You just made it messy." The door moved in the frame as he pressed his shoulder against it. The bathroom lock was a tiny silver turn lock, the kind you use when someone might accidentally walk in while you're brushing your teeth. It was never meant to keep anyone out. He pressed again. Wood cracked near the latch. The operator was saying something. I couldn't understand her. Then there was a bang from downstairs. A voice shouted, "Police!" The pressure left the door. For 1 second, I thought he had run. Then the bathroom door burst open. He came through with his hood still up and a screwdriver in his right hand. I swung the knife without thinking. It caught his arm. He shouted and slammed into me, knocking me back against the sink hard enough to crack the mirror. I dropped the knife. He grabbed my wrist and squeezed so hard my fingers went numb. "Stupid," he said. That was all he got out. 2 officers came down the hallway shouting. One of them hit him from the side, and they both went into the bath. The other officer pulled me into the hallway and kept saying, "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe." Even though I didn't feel safe. I don't think I've felt safe since. They arrested him in my bathroom. His name was Daniel Price. At least that was the name he gave them. He wasn't the delivery driver assigned to my order. The real driver was a woman named Melissa who had been found in her car 3 streets away. Unconscious, but alive. Someone had hit her from behind after she collected my food. Daniel had taken her phone, her thermal bag, and her jacket. That would have been bad enough. Then they searched his car. They found printed receipts, dozens of them, maybe more. Names, addresses, notes. Some were crossed out, some had ticks next to them. Mine had a circle around it. The police wouldn't tell me much, they never do. They kept using words like ongoing investigation and potential link and recovered items. But one officer told me something by accident. He said, the others were lucky too. Then he stopped talking. Others. I stayed with Lewis that night, which tells you how scared I was. I sat on his sofa until morning and watched the rain run down the window. He made tea and kept apologizing for things that had nothing to do with him. By midday, I had convinced myself it was over. Daniel was arrested, Melissa was alive, the police had receipts. The locks were being changed. I would move again if I had to. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from the delivery app. I stared at it, confused, because I had deleted the app in the police station. I had watched it disappear from my screen. But there it was. Your driver is nearby. I opened the notification. The map showed a little bike icon moving down Lewis's street. I stood up so quickly, I spilled tea over my leg. Lewis asked what was wrong. The bike icon stopped outside his house. Then the doorbell rang. Lewis went pale. "No," I said, "don't." He walked to the front window and looked through the curtain. "There's no one there," he said. My phone buzzed again. "Your driver is at your door." Then another message appeared. "Forgot your drink." That was 3 days ago. I'm writing this from a hotel room under a name that isn't mine. The police have my phone now. They said there was no active order, no driver, no record of any notification being sent. but I saw it. Lewis saw the doorbell camera too. Empty porch, no one there. Just 3 knocks recorded by the audio. 3 soft knocks, pause. 3 soft knocks, pause. I don't know whether Daniel had someone working with him. I don't know whether he set something up before they arrested him. I don't know why the app keeps coming back on every phone I borrow, or why the notifications know where I am before I tell anyone. All I know is this. If you order food late at night and the driver says he forgot your drink, tell him to leave it outside. Do not open the door. Do not check the hallway. Do not believe the peephole. And if your phone says the driver is nearby after you've already deleted the app, get out before he knocks. Because last night at 10:43, someone slipped a receipt under my hotel room door. It had my fake name on it, my room number, no dog, traveling alone, bathroom lock weak. At the bottom, written in pen, there were 4 words. You still seem thirsty. You forgot my drink? My Diet Dr. Kelp? Yeah, I'm giving these delivery drivers a 1 star on DoorDash. If I could give less, I would. The next one's from r/no sleep from user Unalloyed St. Trina. 30 years ago, my coworker was dying, and I could have saved him. I didn't. I've been cursed ever since. Today marks the anniversary of Mickey's death, and I can't hold it all inside anymore. I need to come clean, not just about what happened that night, but about everything. Every unconfessed mistake and every bitter failure. That's why it's tormenting me after all. The shape in the sky is drawn to my guilt. Every night it's there, hovering past my bedroom window or swirling in the darkness above the treetops, begging me to acknowledge the heartless shit I've done. And finally, here I am. I'm ready to confess. Fresh out of high school, I scrapped my college plans and got hired as a night security guard. The job didn't pay well, and it certainly didn't make my parents proud, but it was low stress, and that's all I cared about. There was never any trouble. What sane person would leave a warm bed to break into a rubber factory? Mickey, a burly Irishman about 10 years my senior, onboarded me. For how much time we spent together, it was astonishing how little we knew about each other. The man wasn't a born conversationalist. If he hadn't come back from his honeymoon with a vicious lobster red sunburn, I doubt he would have told me about the wedding. Honestly, I was happy with the professional distance. Mickey was a laid-back guy who didn't expect much from me. No expectations meant no pressure. God knows I don't work well under pressure. Our last night together was certainly no exception. It was after midnight. We were doing our rounds, strolling through the dimly lit parking lot. Mickey was lagging a few feet behind me, chowing down on an oversized gas station hoagie. Crickets chirped in the pines that surrounded the factory. There was a sudden clack. The hazy beam from his flashlight stopped bobbing along the asphalt. Took me a few seconds to realize something was wrong. I turned around. He was wobbling in place, clawing at his neck and chest, skin paler than the moon, lips tinted this nightmarish blue-gray. The half-eaten sandwich lay scattered at his feet. He was choking. I knew he was choking, and I'd been taught what to do. Get behind him, wrap my arms around his belly, and thrust. Just as I was about to help, a familiar dread began crawling across my skin, and my brain erupted with fitful static. The specter of doubt was creeping in. Was I sure I knew what to do? What if I made a mistake? Should I thrust in and up, or just in? Did I remember all the steps? Was I supposed to reach into his mouth and try to remove the blockage first? And while those asinine questions left me paralyzed, I just stared at the dying man. Fear was making a mess of his face. Bulging eyes, sharp creases, quiet, contorted terror. The light left him. His body hit the asphalt with a rich, splintering thud. I didn't move. Couldn't tell you exactly how much time passed. It was more than enough to save him, I know that much. Eventually, autopilot kicked in. My legs started dragging me towards the factory. By the time my mind caught up to my muscles, I was already inside, dialing 911 on the break room's rotary telephone. The dispatcher claimed we were lucky. An ambulance happened to be passing by our otherwise remote location at that very moment. As I sprinted back outside, I told myself everything was going to be okay. Mickey and I were the only people here. The camera shouldn't have recorded his death. We'd been too far from the building when he started choking. I could sell them any story I wanted to. No one had to know how badly I messed up. Red lights flickered on the horizon. I was so captivated by relief that I nearly tripped over his corpse, looking down with just enough time to skid to a stop. That's when I noticed something. Something on his wrist was glinting against the approaching light. I bent over. It was the silver strap of some cheap watch. Tiny flecks of glass were scattered around where the watch face had been pulverized between his wrist and the asphalt. I perked my ears. I heard a distant siren, but no ticking. No, 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 I whispered, furiously rotating the strap. The broken watch read 12:31 a.m., Mickey's time of death immortalized. I checked my own watch. My heart plummeted. 1:22 a.m. I could practically hear the police officer asking, "What kind of person waits a whole 50 minutes before phoning for help?" The wailing of the sirens grew louder. The flashing lights were closing in. Instinct took over. I ripped the watch from his wrist and shoved it into my pocket. The ambulance screeched to a halt. EMS leaped from the vehicle, asking what happened as they attempted to resuscitate the long-dead Mickey, and I played my part. I told them he choked and that I'd done everything I could. They lifted the cadaver onto a gurney, carted him into the waiting ambulance, and sped away. A few seconds later, I bolted to my car. I rolled down the windows and floored the accelerator. Wind tore through the vehicle as I shot onto the interstate, cold air stinging me awake. I weighed my options. I could bury the watch, or keep it, or toss it into one of Missouri's endless landfills. In the end, though, I knew exactly where it belonged. It belonged at the bottom of the reservoir my grandpa had built behind his mansion, with all the other broken things. Years had passed since I'd last stepped foot on the property. I parked along a ditch. A single paved footpath connected the dirt road to the boarded-up estate. Painful energy seemed to radiate from the dilapidated structure. Felt like I had a migraine coming on as I walked along the edge of the property, navigating the cluttered mass of pines and white oaks until I reached a clearing and the musty stench of decaying algae confirmed I'd arrived. I lit a cigarette and sucked in some thick gulps of smoke, trying to repress the old fear bubbling beneath my skin. In my family, I've always been the odd one out, the run of the litter. My older brother is a Nobel laureate. My twin sister is an Olympian. Both my parents were successful lawyers, and my grandpa earned a Purple Heart in Vietnam. And I'm just me. Not dumb, but chronically scatterbrained. Not weak, but incredibly clumsy. And anxious. God, I was anxious about everything as a kid. Put it all together, and the diagnosis became clear. I was defective. My parents figured if anyone could fix me, it'd be Grandpa. The familial patriarch, the so-called perfect man, the one who'd made our fortune from nothing. I spent most summers at Grandpa's estate. They were nothing short of hell, but you want to know the real messed up part? I can feel the toll those summers took on me, but I don't remember most of them. They were physical drills, mental exercises, prayer, hikes that seemed to take weeks to complete. But the specifics of all that? Couldn't tell you. The memories are a hazy, soupy mess. The only events I remember with clarity were the punishment ceremonies. You see, if I ever made a mistake, the parameters of which were subjectively defined by Grandpa, I'd be taken out to the reservoir after sunset. He'd hand me something I loved. A toy, an item of clothing, a framed picture. Then he'd command that I make amends. Each mistake is a debt, Lucas. A debt to ourselves and to the gracious heart of the universe. It's time to pay up. A broken offering to counterbalance what you broke today. I'd snap the toy, tear at the clothing, crush the frame beneath my bare foot. Then I'd throw it into the reservoir and watch that tiny piece of me sink. All the while, Grandpa would be on his knees, shaking clasped hands at the sky, earnestly begging something for forgiveness. I always assumed he was pleading with God. Between furious bouts of Vietnamese, he'd repeat the words, "no hell," in English, over and over again. Although he was very particular about what went into the reservoir, he was significantly more particular about keeping my broken things sunk. One night, Grandpa caught me attempting to dredge up the fractured remains of my favorite action figure with a bit of a fishing line. He didn't mince words. "If you ever defile these gracious waters again, I'll kill you, child. Or worse." As someone that's always been riddled with anxiety, none of this improved my performance. It only made me more skittish, more impulsive, and more dysfunctional. So I can't say I was upset when the old coot died, drowned in his own damn reservoir. Bon voyage, asshole. I took the final drag of my cigarette, pulled the broken watch from my pocket, and lobbed both of them into the reservoir. They sank with a dull plop. I expected solace. Much as the punishment ceremonies terrified me, I did recall feeling a gentle warmth flooding through my body when broken things drifted beneath the surface. That night, though, I experienced no warmth. Instead, a strange apprehension started crackling down my spine. Then, from behind me, "What are you doing on my property, and what the hell did you just throw in there?" I shot around. There was a man at the edge of the clearing. The barrel of a rifle gleamed in the moonlight. "I'm so sorry. I used to live here. Or, not me exactly. My family did, and I thought the property was abandoned, so I didn't think it was trespassing." "You know what? Save it for the cops." "What? No, please. I'll leave. I need to go. Please." I continued to stutter out a meek appeal, but I didn't get the sense that the man was still listening. To this day, I don't know what came over me. The possibility of my mess-up being discovered, or having to explain why I'd stolen Mickey's watch in the first place, turned me into an animal. It wasn't rational, it's just what happened. There was a soft crunch in the woods. He peered over his shoulder. I grabbed a rock off the ground and launched myself across the clearing. The man snapped forward. There was a click. I flinched, but nothing happened. The rifle was jammed. I sped up. More hollow clicks emanated through the clearing, rapid and fearful. Click, click, click. I was nearly on top of him. A cloud passed over the moon. The clearing darkened. I never got a good look at his intact face, and I suppose I'm thankful for that. He started to say something. I arched the rock over my head and brought it down. Vanishing was a simpler process back in the 90s. Wasn't much to it, really. I drove until the scenery looked different, stayed low, and kept my eyes on the news, anxiously awaiting the nationwide manhunt. No such manhunt ever came to be. Far as I could tell, at least, it wasn't the easiest thing to keep track of. I don't know who I killed, I just knew where they'd find his body. The more I thought about it, though, the more I realized they may never discover that poor man. Grandpa's estate wasn't exactly prone to foot traffic. The night after Mickey's death, I was on my way to Omaha. I planned on driving into the morning, but heavy snowfall forced me to stop. The 5-room, single-story motel I stayed at was memorably heinous. I jammed the rusty key into the lock and jerked the door open. A battalion of cockroaches skittered into the walls as the hazy lamps clicked on. The frizzy brown carpet had enough splotches and stains to resemble leopard print, and the bathroom reeked of ancient, untamed feculence, the type of caked-in, all-consuming shit stench that requires decades upon decades of intentional neglect to manifest. Not that any of that mattered, really. Even if I were lodging at the most bougie 5-star resort imaginable, swaddled in a Persian silk comforter, I don't think sleep would have come easy. It happened a little after midnight. The room was silent. I was lying on top of the bed's ratty blanket, staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing my laundry list of mess-ups, when I finally began to feel drowsy. I let myself drift, and I was nearly asleep. Movement jolted my eyes wide open. Strange shadows danced quietly along the wall. I shot upright and rubbed the sleep from my eyes, but nothing changed. Dark blobs ballooned and shrank across the surface with fluid motion, like I was staring into a lava lamp with pitch-black plasma. I traced the shadows to their origin, the room's large, front-facing window. I knew I shouldn't push aside the blinds and look. With complete and utter certainty, I knew that. But I also knew how to help someone who's choking, and I knew that murder is an unforgivable transgression, so what difference did knowing really make? I crept across the room, put my face to the blinds, and peeked through a slit. The small parking lot was blanketed with undisturbed snow. There were no cars on the road. A soft wind brushed bits of white from here to there, but the dead trees around the motel did not waver. The world looked still. Then I saw it. I thought it was a cloud at first, but it was too low, and it was moving too quickly through the sky, casting shadows as it drifted in the moonlight. No part of it made sense. The shape was larger than an SUV, but it was as thin as a ribbon, and it rippled through the atmosphere like an eel. I pressed my face into the cold glass, mesmerized. It was alien, bizarre, almost beautiful. All of a sudden, there was a change. It was no longer drifting. It seemed to be expanding, stretching like plastic wrap. But I was mistaken, and once I realized what it was actually doing, I rocketed from the window, heart convulsing against the back of my throat. The shape wasn't stretching, it was getting closer. I rushed past the bed and down the narrow bathroom hallway. The shadows deepened. I threw myself into the cramped space between the closet and the broken mini-fridge. Through shuddering breaths, I peered around the edge. I could barely see. The room had been swallowed by an eclipse. The shape was right outside the window. A muted clicking pierced the silence. It was scarcely audible, but violently alive, pulsing with frantic energy. A noise somewhere between the tapping of a pinball machine and the clattering of rat teeth. Unnatural, inhuman, continuous. It only receded when the sun began to rise. I packed my meager belongings and left, but I was no longer going to Omaha. I had no plan, no destination. I was just driving away. By sunset, I was entering a hotel in Des Moines, 200 miles from where I'd started. The night was quiet. The sky was clear. I thought I was safe. Then, around 4 a.m., right as I was drifting off, I heard it. The clicking. I didn't look outside, not that time. From there, every day was the same. I spent 6 months evading whatever was following me. I'd start driving around dawn, careening down the highway, dead set on creating as much distance as I could from the shape. The farther I got, the longer it seemed to take to catch up with me. But no matter how many miles I traveled, I never went a full night without hearing it. It wasn't a sustainable life. I was barely sleeping. My cash was dwindling. Then, one night, the unthinkable happened. My car died. I was stranded on a deserted stretch of road, miles from the nearest city, and the sun was already sinking. I did what I could to protect my sanity, frantically taping newspapers and fast food wrappers over the windows, barricading myself from the inevitable. Then, a little after midnight, it came. It began as a black speck on the windshield, but silently, it grew, and it grew. And by the time it was hovering inches above my car, that black speck had transformed into a monstrous penumbra, submerging me in hungry darkness. I curled into a ball and clamped my hands over my ears, but it was futile. I couldn't escape the clicking, and the more I listened, the more I began to hear language in the discord. It was hard to make out, but it sounded like a single, repeating name. Noel. Was that his name? I wondered. Was the man I killed named Noel? That would explain it. I'd escaped arrest, sure, but could I really escape judgment? Maybe the shape was sent from God to torment me. Maybe this was my punishment. Maybe this is what I deserved. I knew I could step outside and face it. I came close, but ultimately I didn't. The following morning, I stumbled out of my car and started down the road. I was in tatters by the time I reached Portland. Body aching, mind frayed, desperate for somewhere to rest. I settled on the first place I saw, a kitsy little hole-in-the-wall bed and breakfast named Honey's Hoodoo and Hostel. Best decision I ever made. Inside, the place looked more like an apothecary than a hostel. Bright plants dangled from dusty pots, and the walls were crowded with animal skulls and dream catchers. I shuffled through a maze of narrow aisles to the front desk, where a slender woman with toffee-colored eyes glanced up from a dog-eared crossword book. I tried to speak, but she shushed me, spun around, and rummaged through a cabinet. Too tired to protest, I just waited. A minute later, she slid a key and a vial of clear liquid across the counter. Drink it. We'll figure out reimbursement once you get some sleep. Room 3. I slept for an uninterrupted 16 hours. blissfully deep, dreamless rest. In the morning, I profusely thanked my soon-to-be wife. Honey turned out to be a real miracle worker, though the medicine she gave me wasn't anything magical. It was a sleep aid. Melatonin, valerian root, and a splash of bottom-shelf vodka for a bit of a kick. Sleep was a godsend, but it didn't fix everything. I still saw it. The shape, hovering above me, skulking through the night sky, blending in with the clouds. It was always there. I didn't understand why I'd begun keeping its distance, but I didn't dwell on it either. Time passed. I didn't tell her much until our son was born. Looking down the barrel of fatherhood, I came clean to Honey. I told her about Mickey's death and how I could have saved him, about my cold family and my strange, dogmatic grandfather. I even told her about the thing in the sky, though I downplayed some of the insanity. I told her about everything except Noel. I could never tell her about the man I killed. To her credit, she didn't judge me, though she didn't grant me clemency either. All she said was, "The deepest hells are usually the ones we dig with our own two hands, Lucas." Things were quiet for a long while. I buried the rest of my guilt and my shame in order to focus on my family. That seemed to do the trick until a few years ago. When my son turned 19, the same age I was when Mickey died, there was a change. Out of nowhere, something began waking me up in the middle of the night. It was sporadic at first, once a month, maybe less, without warning. I'd bolt upright in bed like I'd been physically ripped from sleep. The same way you'd wake up to a smoke alarm blaring, but there'd never be any noise. No clicking, no shadows at my window, nothing at all. I doubled up on Honey's special sleep aid and tried to ignore it. Slowly, though, the frequency increased. Once a month to every other week, then every week, every few days, every night. I tripled the dose of my sleep aid, quadrupled it, added more vodka. Nothing helped. Then last week, it happened. Once again, I bolted upright, but the room wasn't silent. A faint noise curled into my ear, similar to the clicking, but not frantic. It was organized, controlled, rhythmic. I shut my eyes and listened. A sinking dread crawled through my body. The noise wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from right next to me. I opened my eyes and turned to face Honey. She was sleeping soundly. I leaned in, closer, close enough that my ear was resting on the front of her neck, and I felt something. There was something hard beneath her skin. Not bone, not cartilage. It was too broad, too flat, and up close, the sound was unmistakable. It wasn't a click. It was a tick, like from a watch. I lifted my head and looked at her. Honey's eyelids were closed, but to my horror, I could see her eyes glowing dully beneath them. A pearly light shining through the translucent membrane, fixed right on me, staring at me, judging me. That night, I left my family behind. I got in my car and drove south, and overhead, the shape followed. Locating Mickey's widow was surprisingly easy. She lived in a single-story ranchero on the outskirts of my hometown. The lawn was dense and unkempt. Neglected Christmas decorations lay strewn about, plastic elves and tangles of string lights peeking out of the overgrowth. The roof had holes big enough to be visible from the sidewalk. I breathed deep and began pacing up to the front door, trying not to ruminate on how the disrepair was likely downstream of my failure to act all those years ago. Jagged wood bit into my skin as I knocked. A stout woman with a gray ponytail and bits of red lipstick on her front teeth answered. Without preamble, I asked her if she was Mickey's widow. She nodded. The drive had given me ample time to plan out a concise, remorseful confession. But, in the moment, all that got thrown out the window. I barged into the woman's house and just started talking, told her everything. I used to work alongside her husband. I was there the night he choked. I could have saved his life. I skipped town the night he died, never looked back, and I was so goddamn sorry. When I was done, I waited for her to speak. I expected anger, revulsion, violence. Instead, all I got was confusion. You never heard, did you? I cocked my head. They did an autopsy on Mickey, and well, he died of a massive heart attack. The coroner said there was nothing anyone could have done to save him. My vision blurred. Nausea hit me fast and hard. The guilt, the shame, the boundless, unrelenting anxiety. It was all for nothing. I killed that man for nothing. As I drive, I find myself dwelling on what Honey said all those years ago. The deepest hells are usually the ones we dig with our own two hands. You know what that makes me think about? Something my grandpa dug with his own two hands. The reservoir, the stagnant water, the broken things, the punishment ceremonies, the old man on his knees, chanting unintelligible Vietnamese prayers and repeating a two-word phrase in English. That's when it hit me. If I couldn't save Mickey, then I never made a mistake. If I never made a mistake, I shouldn't have thrown this broken watch into the reservoir. The shape wasn't saying Noel. It was repeating the phrase, no hell. It's him, I think. I'm en route to my grandfather's now, hoping to get there before the sun sets. This all started with that broken watch. If I dredge it from the reservoir, maybe it'll stop. Maybe I can finally be free. Or, more likely, everything will just get much, much worse. And that's okay. All things considered, I deserve that, don't I? How do you even continue living with this grief? I guess it goes without me saying, the most unsettling part of this story was this person lived with this grief for this person that ended up just dying from a heart attack. I mean, of course, they ended up living with the grief of the other person they killed, but, it was all unnecessary. The next story today is also from r/no sleep from user Linus287. I found a door in my apartment that wasn't there yesterday. I've lived in apartment 6B for 4 years. It's not a large place. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a narrow kitchen, and a living room with windows that look out over the back alley. I know every crack in the paint, every sound the pipes make at night, every place where the floorboards complain when you step on them. That's why I noticed the door immediately. It was in the hallway between my bedroom and the bathroom, where there had always been a blank wall. A white wooden door. Plain, old, perfectly ordinary, except it had not been there the night before. At first I thought I was still dreaming. I stood in the hallway in my t-shirt and sweatpants, holding a mug of coffee I couldn't remember pouring, staring at the brass doorknob. There was no frame damage, no dust, no smell of fresh paint. It looked like it had always belonged there. I touched the wall around it. Solid. I touched the door. Cold. Not cool like wood in the morning, but cool like something kept underground. I called my landlord. Very funny, he said. I'm not joking. There was a pause. What kind of door? What do you mean, what kind of door? A normal door. Another pause. Don't open it. I almost laughed, but his voice stopped me. He didn't sound annoyed. He sounded afraid. Mr. Keller, I said slowly, why would there be a door in my hallway? I'll come over, he said. Do not open it. Do not touch it again. Then he hung up. I stood there for a long time, looking at the door. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Usually, I could hear traffic from the street, my neighbor's TV, the old radiator clicking. But in that moment, everything had gone quiet, as if the whole building were holding its breath. Then someone knocked from the other side. 3 slow knocks. I dropped my coffee. It shattered on the floor, hot liquid spreading around my bare feet. The knocks came again. 3 times. Not loud, not desperate, polite, like someone waiting to be invited in. I backed away into the living room and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron pan from the kitchen. Then I waited. Nothing happened. 5 minutes passed. 10. The door stood there, white and still. At 9:17, my landlord arrived. He was usually a cheerful man. Round face, red cheeks, always smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and peppermint gum. That morning, he looked 20 years older. He pushed past me without saying hello and stopped in the hallway. When he saw the door, all the color left his face. No, he whispered. You know what this is? He didn't answer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ring of keys. His hands were shaking so badly that the keys jingled like tiny bells. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Locking it." "From this side?" He ignored me and tried key after key in the brass lock. None fit. Then the knocking started again. 3 slow knocks. Mr. Keller froze. A voice came from behind the door. Soft, female. "Martin?" My landlord stepped back as if he had been slapped. "Martin," the voice repeated. "I know you're there." I looked at him. "Who is that?" His voice opened, but no words came out. The voice behind the door sighed. It was a sad sound, almost human. "Martin, please, it's so dark." My landlord grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "You need to leave," he said. "What?" "Now. Pack a bag, stay somewhere else." "Are you insane? What's behind that door?" He looked at me then, and I understood something horrible. He did not know. Not exactly. Before I could ask anything else, the doorknob turned. Very slowly. Left. Right. Left again. Mr. Keller whispered something in German I didn't understand and pulled me toward the front door. That was when the voice changed. It became my mother's. "Daniel?" I stopped moving. My mother died when I was 16. Cancer took her slowly, then all at once. I had forgotten many things about her over the years, but not her voice. Never her voice. "Daniel," she said again from behind the door. "Honey, please help me." My landlord tightened his grip. "Do not listen." I could not breathe. "Mom?" The door creaked. Just a little. A thin black line appeared between the door and the frame. From inside came a smell I remembered instantly. Lavender soap, hospital sheets, rain on the day of her funeral. My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. "Daniel," my mother whispered. "I waited so long." I pulled away from Mr. Keller. He slapped me, hard. The sound cracked through the apartment. I stumbled back, stunned. "Listen to me," he hissed. "That is not your mother." The door opened another inch. Behind it, there was no room, no closet, no hallway, only darkness. Not the kind of darkness you see when the lights are off. This was thicker, deeper. It seemed to move slightly, like black water. And from inside it, my mother began to cry. I hated my landlord in that moment. I hated him because part of me knew he was right. And I hated him more because another part of me still wanted to open the door. He dragged me out of the apartment. The second we crossed the threshold into the stairwell, all the sound came rushing back. Cars outside, someone coughing below us, a dog barking in another unit. Normal life. Behind my apartment door, something slammed. Once, twice. Then came my mother's voice, muffled now, but screaming. "Daniel, don't leave me again." I spent that night in a hotel. Mr. Keller refused to explain everything. He only told me that apartment 6B had been renovated in 1998 after a fire. 3 people had died in the building before the fire department arrived. One of them was his wife. Her name had been Anna. The next morning he called a priest, then a locksmith. Then 2 men I had never seen before who arrived in a van with no company name on it. They went into my apartment together. Only one of them came back out. The priest was pale and shaking. The locksmith had blood on his shirt. Mr. Keller would not look at me. "What happened?" I asked. The locksmith pushed past me and left without his tools. Mr. Keller handed me an envelope. Inside was cash, a lot of it. "Move," he said. "What about my things?" "Leave them." "Are you serious?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were wet. "The door is gone," he said, "but now there's a window." I did not go back. Not for my clothes, not for my laptop, not for the box of photographs under my bed. I found another apartment across town. I changed my number. I tried to forget the whole thing. For a while, I almost did. Until tonight. At 2:13 in the morning, I woke to the sound of knocking. 3 slow knocks. Not from my front door, not from the hallway, from behind my bedroom wall. Then my mother's voice whispered, "Daniel, I found another way in." Do I even need to say it? Homeboy's mom is living in his wall. You know, if it would have been an escapable thing, I probably wouldn't have included it in this video, being as it's surrounded around very unsettling stories. I guess it'd still be unsettling, but there's no escape. It's going to keep following the OP no matter where they go. The next story today is from r/no sleep from user Let's Split Up, also known as Quincy Lee. You should definitely go to their website and check out QuincyLeeStories.com. They're an amazing writer. I read their stuff on the channel all the time. I saw a creepy painting for sale online. Did not order it, but it arrived on my doorstep and now I can't get rid of it. I didn't order the painting. Let's get that out of the way right now. I was mildly buzzed, yes, but not so inebriated that I'd mistakenly click buy now and order the scariest painting I've ever seen in my life. Like most people, I like to look at stuff I'd never buy online. Last month it was houses I can't afford on Zillow. This month it's paintings. If I really like one, I might save it to make it my desktop theme. That's the extent of my commitment to supporting art. See, I'm too poor to afford to deck my walls in original artwork, even if I wanted to order a painting, which I didn't. Especially not this painting. It depicted a figure in an impressionist style, sort of like the famous Munch, The Scream, crossed with the style of Rembrandt. The figure all cloaked in darkness except for the illumination on the face. The face was the most horrifying part. A fleshy patchwork of light in the otherwise dark canvas. Featureless, indistinguishable. Like a nightmarish figure out of a dream. I remember staring at my phone for several long minutes, zooming in on that figure, wondering what it was about the not quite humanness of it that made it so creepy. Even through the phone screen, even with no eyes, I could swear I felt it watching me. I took a screenshot, sent it to some friends, asking if it wasn't the creepiest thing they'd ever seen in their lives. That conversation quickly devolved into us sending lots of scary art pictures back and forth, like classic paintings of spooky children, disproportionate babies, a little Bosch, and so on. Fast forward 3 days. There's a package on my doorstep waiting for me when I get home, wrapped in brown paper. I tear open the paper packaging, and it's the painting. That painting. The featureless smear of a face stares at me from the dark canvas. It looks so fleshy, I could almost sink my fingers into it. Now, I assumed, of course, that someone ordered the painting for me as a joke, but none of my friends would admit to it. The conversation turned to teasing about me being cursed. To me, this was just further evidence that one or all of them were playing what they thought was the world's most hilarious prank. And honestly, I thought it was kind of funny too, so I went along. I hung the cursed painting in my living room, and that was that. It should have gone down in the book of my life as a mildly amusing footnote, something to tell guests about when they came into my home and asked what the hell was that creepy painting on the wall. But a week after it arrived, I was sitting at my desk working when I swear I heard a quiet rustle. And you know how you can feel it when someone in your periphery is staring? The sensation was so strong, I turned around and I almost screamed. The painting had eyes, and they were watching me. And I swear to God, swear to you on everything holy, it blinked. Maybe the blink was just my imagining, but it definitely had newly painted eyes there in its fleshy, impressionistic blotch of a face. Smears of darkness with just a tiny hint of light reflecting from them. Of course, I snapped a photo and sent it to my friends. And of course, they all assumed I'd painted on the eyes myself. Even I had to admit, when I got up close, it was clear that new paint had been applied on top of the original. I sent another text to the group. Alright, which one of you jokers have been in my house? Denials all around. Maybe it was a prank, I thought. Most of my close friends know where I keep my spare key. But the painting kept changing. The changes were so subtle, I honestly didn't notice at first. Even when I did, I assumed it was whoever had pranked me by buying the painting, that they were adding brushstrokes whenever we had get-togethers. It almost became normal, the way I'd see new additions, just a little at a time. We often joked about it, everyone wondering who the mystery artist was who kept adding details. My friends would later tell me they all honestly thought it was me. But what really started to creep me out was when the changes to the painting made it look like me. One day I woke up and walked out to a creepy impressionistic portrait of myself and decided enough was enough. I took the painting off the wall, dragged it downstairs to the dumpster, and tossed it in. Good riddance. But when I came home from work, it was back on its place on the wall. I was beginning to question my sanity. I tossed it out again, but the next morning when I woke up, it was back on the wall, and its lip was curled, like it was smiling. I had to go to work, and since I didn't want to run down to the dumpster again, I just turned it around so it was facing the wall. At least that way, it couldn't watch me. When I came home from work, I considered trying to throw it away one more time, or burn it, but I was exhausted after a long day, and since it was still facing the wall, its eyes no longer following me, I left it there, had dinner, and spent the evening scrolling through images of exotic plants, my newest fixation. Decided I would deal with the creepy curse thing in the morning. I did notice, though, as I was getting ready for bed, that it was crooked. I straightened it on the wall and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was woken by a loud crash. When I rushed out to see what had caused it, I found that the painting had fallen from the wall. Its frame was cracked. Frowning, I nudged it with my toe, flipped it over. The canvas on the other side was torn and empty, completely empty. There was no figure in the painting, and suddenly I had that feeling again so strong, that feeling of eyes. I backed to the corner of the living room, scanning all corners of my apartment. The sofa, the table, the kitchen area across the open bar, the windows. Where were the eyes watching me from? Where? I was still standing there with my heart hammering like I was about to go into cardiac arrest, looking in disbelief at a broken painting and wondering what was going on when I heard this patter of footsteps and a click. My bedroom door had just closed. Immediately, I called the police to report an intruder. But while I was on the phone with the dispatcher, trying not to sound insane when I described the painting and the figure that was missing from it, suddenly it struck me that this might be one more part of the prank, that one of my friends, the one who might have been making alterations to the painting, could have snuck in to make some final adjustments. And maybe, after they accidentally knocked the painting off the wall and caused the crash, they ran into my room to hide from me. Not entirely plausible, but then neither were the fears I was babbling to this 911 operator. She assured me they'd send someone out. I think she assumed I was high as a kite, but also that it was better to be safe than sorry. Or maybe she just thought I needed a wellness check. I'd have thought so, too, after being on that call with me. While waiting for their arrival, in case it was a prank, I steeled myself and went to the bedroom door. Then, just to be on the safe side, I grabbed a kitchen knife. A knife I swore I wouldn't use unless I knew for sure it wasn't one of my friends. And then I went back to the bedroom door, shoved it open, and brandished the knife while yelling. Standing next to my bed was my reflection. No, not my reflection, but that's what it looked like. It was me. But the hair was messier, like the brushstrokes weren't quite finished, and the clothes were not quite right. Almost a strange mix of everything I wore all put together, like the painter couldn't decide on which outfit, so went with them all. But the smile was sharp enough, as were the eyes, and the not me looked at me and raised its hand. In that hand, it held a painted version of my knife. Shit, I gasped. Shit, its lips imitated. I don't know which of us lunged first. Probably the painted me. Real me was just standing there in shock. Next thing I knew, I felt the thunk of an impact in my stomach. And then, I don't even know how to describe. The painted knife handle was sticking out of me, and where the blade entered the skin, paint flecked away instead of blood. Instinct kicked in, and I fought like a wildcat, slashing and stabbing, dragging my knife through that other me in a slicing motion, again and again. The other me opened its mouth in a scream, but all I heard was the ragged sound of canvas ripping. It made a final effort to cut through me, but then my last slice tore it in two. It went limp, only a ragged piece of canvas. I was bleeding from a deep gash in my belly. I believe I lost consciousness. Paramedics later told me they'd found me on the floor, bleeding from a knife wound. Draped over me was a canvas that I'd apparently cut free from the broken frame. They made me get a psych eval. You see, there was no evidence of anyone else in my apartment. The authorities believed that I got angry at the painting, tore it apart, and somehow accidentally stabbed myself in the frenzy. When I finally returned home, the painting, the broken frame, and what was left of the canvas were gone. Not a trace of them, not a scrap. And I've been wondering ever since, what would have happened if I hadn't woken up? Was it going to kill me? Or was it going to somehow put me in the painting and perhaps take my place? I'll never know, because the painting is gone. Gone. From my life at least, but here's the thing. One of my friends sent me a link yesterday, told me they stumbled across it on an art website. The painting is back up on sale. For the love of God, do not buy. You heard the man. Don't buy the painting. This was a freaking creepy story. It takes something completely ordinary that anybody could have done, which is getting a painting on the internet, and then slowly makes the painting feel alive. And turns out it is alive. Anyways, the next story is from r/no sleep from user Saturdead, and it's titled We Shrink Wrap Our Dead. One of my earliest memories are from a funeral. At the time, I didn't understand that it was a funeral. It's a confusing thought. I wasn't scared or sad. It was just a lot of people that I knew gathered in one room. A lot of them were upset. That much I remember. But there was something else. There was a man in the room, resting on a big table. There was an older woman in a robe talking to us in a soft tone. At some point, my mother picked me up and we walked to the man on the table. He was being wrapped in plastic. I cried and my mother rocked me in her arms. I didn't understand that the man was dead, but how could I? I'd never seen anything die. A couple of the older kids were given blow dryers to help shrink the plastic. My mother put me down while she helped turn the body to get the wrapping right. I retreated to the end of the table, where I played with my favorite Ninja Turtle toy. When no one was looking, I pricked a hole in the plastic, just between the man's toes. It was an accident. I was playing, and the toy had a sharp edge. I was a bit embarrassed, so I didn't say anything. We all sat there for hours, singing songs and talking in hushed voices. The old woman in the robe was so kind and careful. I remember her stroking my hair and kissing me on the cheek. All the children of the town were there, both the infants and the teenagers. They didn't want us to sleep, but we couldn't help it. They gave us candy to keep us motivated, but I still nodded off. I was barely awake when I heard the noise. I remember the plastic turning this thick, ink-like black. Then something slipped out, right there in that hole I poked between his toes. Something moved. I remember drawing in a cold breath that made me choke. It was so cold that I could feel something crystallizing down my throat. My voice burned and my heart kept beating louder and louder. I didn't understand what was happening. The last thing I remember from that day was the kind old woman screaming at two men to hold me down as she hurried to me with a bone saw and an apologetic expression. Next thing I remember, I was in the hospital. It wasn't that bad. Getting fed through a tube in your arm is weird, but I got so many toys and comics from that day that it felt like Christmas all over. I had aches and pains, but they passed. Once I was okay, my parents sent me to live with my aunt in a neighboring town. I didn't like it, but they painted it as this great opportunity and a chance to meet new friends. They said it was temporary, and I believed them. I hadn't met enough liars to know the signs. That temporary solution lasted all through my childhood. My aunt's a wonderful woman, and how she managed to care for not only me, but my two cousins is beyond me. My parents would send her money, but they would never come to visit. We never talked about them, and when they passed in the winter of 2016, I wasn't told until long after their funeral. I can't say I miss them. I wish I could, but I can't. After high school, I decided to pursue a degree in anthropology. I don't want to attribute all my interest to that first memory, but I can't say it didn't have an impact on me. I had no idea why our burial ritual had been so strange compared to anything I've read. We bury our dead in coffins, in the ground, and cremate them. We don't shrink wrap them in front of an audience. For the longest time, I thought it was something I made up. A bad dream brought on by a nasty fever, but the more I thought about it, the more I had to know for sure. While studying for my master's degree, I decided I was going to write a paper about this custom. That is, if it was real to begin with. I had a couple of other topics lined up just in case. I asked my aunt about it. She wasn't too happy talking about the topic, as it brought up bad memories of my parents. She asked me to consider other ideas. However, I took note of something interesting. She never disputed the fact that the shrink wrapping was real. She would mention how that town wasn't a big deal and how it wasn't noteworthy. But she never said I was wrong. Side note, guys, how many rolls of cling wrap do you think it would take to wrap up a body? They had to drop at least a couple $100 on the stuff, right? Anyways, let's continue. The village is in rural South Dakota. If you follow the Runalong River, past the town of Hilltop and the wheat farms, and far enough to the northwest, there's a hillside community with about 550 people. Not a lot of folks choose to settle there, as the place has spotty wireless and the roads have barely been maintained since the 70s. You'd be excused for not knowing it existed. Most people just notice their Wi-Fi going bad as they drive past. Those who live up there are mostly retirees, but there's a couple who make their living doing seasonal jobs for surrounding farms and ranchers. There's a grocery shop, a couple of truck drivers, and a church. If you follow the main road, you get to a bus stop. There's a preschool, but not a lot of children. Despite my aunt's disinterest, I decided to pursue this topic. I called up the village priest. The one I remembered was already an old woman, so I figured there'd be someone else attending the flock. Turns out, I was right. I got in touch with a man named Pastor Oswald. He picked up before the second dial tone. I was sitting in my car at the time, holding my phone with my cheek as I scribbled in my notebook. "Pastor Oswald," I asked. "Hope I got the right number." "Sorry, I don't get a lot of calls," he laughed. "Who am I speaking to?" I introduced myself as a master's student in anthropology and explained my interest in their burial rites. I didn't bring up the details of my past, thinking this person probably didn't know about me either way. I explained how I was there to interview and observe for academic purposes. Pastor Oswald waved it off. "No problem at all," he assured me. "We have a ceremony scheduled 2 days from now that you're welcome to attend. Respectfully, of course." How could I say no? I drove out there on the day of the ceremony. I was told it would be held later in the evening, so I had plenty of time to make myself reacquainted with the town. I took a detour off the highway and noticed my internet connection going spotty, so I knew it wasn't far. There was something familiar about the smell. It's strange how well something that small sticks with us. Just from taking a deep breath, I could tell I'd been there before. Springtime never really changes. It was just that time of year when it's still uncomfortably cold, but the sun shines so brightly it stings your eyes. Where a warm jacket is too much, but leaving it at home is too little. That in-between space where nature stays by the door like a cat, meowing at you to open, but not knowing if it wants to leave. I found the bus stop and subsequently the road leading into town. I don't think I've ever seen a more beaten up patch of asphalt. There had to be some other way for trucks to get up there that I didn't know about. I could hear my insurance premiums cry as the shock absorbers struggled to keep pace. The town church was a classic white with a small turn-of-the-century Midwestern bell tower. I couldn't see the bell, though. There were a couple of cars parked outside, but no one seemed to be around. I knocked a couple of times on the big double doors, but no one answered. I figured I'd give Pastor Oswald a call, but I couldn't get a signal through. It was the middle of the day, but there were a couple of people milling about. Mostly older folks walking their dogs or buying groceries. Out of all the people that passed by, 3 of them were under the age of 60, and they might just have appeared younger than they really were. The grocery store had a bit of a cafe corner where you could sit down to have a sandwich. It wasn't so much a coffee place as it was a collection of chairs scattered around a handful of wobbly tables, with a couple of handwritten signs showing the price of drinks. It looked way too cheap, but that's probably because they hadn't adjusted for the past 6 years of inflation. I grabbed a seat by the window, looking out over an abandoned street. A couple of crows had made their way into a trash can and threw garbage out like there was no tomorrow. They looked like they knew what they were doing. More young birds than there were young people. As I sat down for lunch, a peculiar man walked in. He was in his early 50s, with a shaved head and a 5 o'clock shade lining his jaw. Bit of a beer belly, but he had these really clear green eyes. He gave me a long look, stopped, and circled back. He pointed a finger at me and cocked his head. "I know you," he stated. "How do I know you?" "I don't think you know me," I said. "Sorry." "Now hold on." He sat down across from me, still thinking out loud. Then, pointing again, he started listing names. My mother, my father, my aunt, a couple of my cousins. Then something clicked. He snapped his fingers. "Don't tell me," he said. "You're Henry's kid." "Got me there," I admitted. "You see the family resemblance?" "Don't you?" I raised an eyebrow at that. He looked at me like I was an idiot. "Jerry. Uncle Jerry. Dad's brother?" "I never heard of an Uncle Jerry." "Figures." He reached out a hand. I was hesitant at first, but he had a genuine smile. That, and he had managed to list a whole bunch of names from my family, some of which I barely remembered myself. He was the real deal in one way or another. I shook his hand as he started firing off a bunch of questions. We had a lot of catching up to do. We spoke for hours. He was pleasant to talk to, and the more I looked, the more of myself I could see in him. We had the same ears, for example, and the same space between our front teeth. I told him about my studies and the peculiar memory of the shrink wrapping. He perked up at that. "They still do that," he said. "It's the strangest thing." "You know what it's about?" "Yeah, I'm surprised you don't. Given the circumstance, you know." "What are you talking about?" I sipped my coffee as he gave me a curious look. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his seat. "They call it Good Friday lung. You had it as a kid, don't you remember?" Good Friday lung was a condition brought on by something in the soil. They didn't have an explanation for it, but it was something that occurred at about 3 to 5 days of decomposition. A person who died would exude this black smoke that made people sick. Apparently, that's something I got when I was younger. That would explain my memory. Burying them just makes it spread through the soil. Gets sucked up in the groundwater and the crops. Dangerous stuff. What about cremation? Burning them spreads it faster. It gets in the air like a cloud. A whole bunch of people died from that at the turn of the century, according to the church records. What about acid? Liquidation? Might work, but that'd be expensive as hell. You can't just get industrial-grade body-burning acid at a moment's notice. So yeah, we shrink wrap. Simple. I got to see it for myself. Well, you'll get to. Old Harlan passed a couple days ago. Sad to see the stuttering old fool go, but Jerry shrugged. That's life. I'd never heard of Good Friday lung. It sounded ridiculous. Apparently, it was some kind of aerial infection that affected people who'd lived in that town too long. They tried several techniques over the years, but shrink wrapping was the simplest and most cost-effective way to prevent any harm from spreading. It didn't quite explain everything. For example, why did they gather all the children at the ceremony? It seemed ill-advised to bring all the young to witness something so macabre. What Jerry had shared was a start, but it didn't quite paint the full picture. I'd never heard of anything like this, and yet they all accepted it like it was a part of everyday life. My estranged uncle was supportive of my research into the subject, albeit a bit less helpful than he might have wanted to be. For example, he had no idea where the condition originated. Apparently, it was just part of living by the river. Later that evening, people gathered at the church. Jerry was supposed to meet up with me a little later, so this was my chance to talk to Pastor Oswald and get a bit of history. The double doors were wide open, and a group of 24 people had already gathered. And there, on a stone altar at the very front, was an old dead man, as naked as the day he was born. Pastor Oswald spotted me across the room. Compared to most people living there, he was relatively young, only 40 or so years old. He had these big glasses and an aw shucks kind of demeanor to him. I can imagine exactly what this guy looks like based on that. That's funny. I could easily see him as someone willing to geek out at some kind of convention. He shook my hand and invited me in. "Glad to see a new face," he said. "These are trying times, but it's important to challenge perspectives. I hope I'm not interrupting. Just don't touch anything and you'll be fine." He showed me around the room and introduced me. There were 2 men by the back that were supposed to transport the body after the ceremony, locking it in a crypt. There were a couple of volunteers helping with the plastic wrapping and turning the body. Then there were the children. As part of the ceremony, about a dozen children were there to help out. Most of them were given blow dryers to help the plastic shrink in this vacuum-tight seal. I had a couple of questions about that. Is there a particular reason why you're involving the children? I asked. They're most susceptible to the condition, he explained. If someone gets sick, we need to know right away. That's why it's best to keep everyone around until we know the seal will hold. Involving them in the ceremony keeps them close and occupied. Then why not keep them in the back or the other room? Then we can't immediately see if they get affected. They also get impatient from the waiting. Then why are there no paramedics around, or doctors, maybe gas masks, or... It's not that kind of condition. While Pastor Oswald still smiled, I could tell there was something in my line of questioning that poked a nerve. I slowed down, brought out my notebook, and took it one question at a time. Then what kind of condition is it? Pastor Oswald mulled the question over as he double-checked his equipment. There was a veil that was supposed to go over the body once the ceremony was complete. There was a wheeled gurney to roll the body out, to be sealed in a communal crypt. Those things I expected, but what bothered me was the table with instruments and songs, flutes and tambourines, child-sized. We've had a lot of people trying to fix it over the years, he explained. They can't find a source. They can't even tell if you have it or not. It's not until the moment you lay dead and the decay sets in that the condition reveals itself. And by then, you want them contained. Exactly, he nodded. But as far as prevention goes, or the source of the contamination, your guess is as good as mine. I just know that it's been here a long time, and it'll probably be here long after you and I are gone. Then why not just move? Well, if you have it, you'll just be bringing it somewhere else. A lot of folks don't want to take that chance, so they've decided to stick around. But as you might have noticed, there's a lot less people living here than there used to be. So in a generation or two, who knows? He handed me a small bowl full of wrapped chocolate mints. I took one and smiled as he hurried off to help an older man with a walker. The ceremony started at about 9 p.m. Most people sat down in the pews, but the children were sat up front by the altar. Pastor Oswald spoke in a very calm and reassuring tone. He explained it as a blessing, a challenge of faith, to be overcome. In these trying modern times, we often forget about the imperceptible things that shape our lives. Things like the way the wind carries our breath, how the moon shines through our window when the power goes out, how faith lifts us out of bed to carry our burdens. But men like Harlan know of these things. They know them well. It was a beautiful speech. I remembered to take notes, but I was a bit distracted. I didn't even notice Uncle Jerry sneaking in to sit at my side. I was about to say something to him when he raised a finger to his lips, showing me I ought to stay quiet. Pastor Oswald painted this ceremony as a reassurance of faith, that we're willing to do what we must in order to retain the natural order of things, that we must not let Harlan be remembered as something harmful to the community. The ceremony was explained as tying a final ribbon on a life well lived. There were a lot of songs and hymns, some which I'd heard before, some not. Jerry seemed to know all of them by heart. Some kids helped out by playing simple instruments or tapping their feet. There was an older woman playing the church organ. Pastor Oswald had a surprisingly strong voice. Harlan's widow described her husband's love for the outdoors and how he loved to take moonlight walks by wheat fields. She urged everyone to take the scenic route home that night, as it was a full moon, to maybe get a sense of what he appreciated so much about the open sky. It was a nice thought, and I could see more than a few tears among the audience. Her jab about his chain smoking got a couple of laughs too. As the ceremony neared midnight, the children were asked to come up to the plastic-wrapped body with their blow dryers. As the machines began to whir, I could hear the plastic creak as the wrap tightened. It didn't take long. All of a sudden, the man on the altar had gone from a person to a package, anonymous and generic. As the songs continued, I noticed a shift in the room. The plastic was slowly turning gray, and the two men who were charged with moving the body were on high alert, but not towards the body. They were looking at the congregation, the children in particular. The parents were too. It's like no one was really watching the dead body in the room. Something was changing. As the plastic turned completely black, everyone seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The plastic seal seemed to hold. Pastor Oswald cheered, and the congregation cheered with him as they celebrated and gave thanks. The body was carefully moved to the wheeled gurney and covered in a thin veil. The two men wheeled the body out, and I got up to follow them. Pastor Oswald stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, but you can't come with them. It's a safety measure." "Not even from a distance?" He rolled his eyes a little and looked around the room. One of the kids was pulling on his sleeve, demanding his attention. "All right, from a distance," he agreed. "Just don't touch anything, you understand?" "I'll keep my distance." He mouthed a silent thank you as he diverted his attention to a young boy wanting to show off his tambourine skills. Most of the children were being taken home. The ritual was over. I followed the two men outside. There were no graves, only mausoleums. The men stopped as they realized I was following, but I assured them I'd keep my distance. They nodded at that and continued rolling the body down a path. The wheels on the gurney struggled against the gravel. They were in the middle of a casual conversation, not really related to anything. Perhaps this was a bit of routine for them. Given the average age of those who lived there, that wouldn't surprise me. They were discussing one of them buying a new car from a less than reputable dealer and the pros and cons of such an investment. Halfway down the line of mausoleums, they stopped. Turns out they'd messed up the number and taken a wrong turn. They had to backtrack and go around. It was a bit of a hassle, so before they did, they decided to go on a smoke break. As promised, I kept my distance as they left the body on the table. There was no wind and the gurney was steady. There was no harm to it. I joined them in their discussion, trying not to impose. I asked a couple of practical questions about the ceremony and the history of their role. I made a couple of notes about how they were called ferrymen before they returned to their topic of secondhand cars. As they did, my ears perked up. I was hearing something, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I looked around for Jerry, but he was still inside with the others. It was something else. Not a breeze rustling the leaves, not a single drop of rain. No smell coming from the dry old blue sunflowers resting by the mausoleum door. No, it was something much more mundane. A crow. The ferryman hadn't noticed it. It had landed on the edge of the gurney, thinking the plastic wrap held some kind of trash-like delicacy. These birds were hard-coded to tear through wrapping to find the goodies inside, and it didn't take long to act on those impulses. By the time the ferryman noticed, it was too late. The crow poked its beak straight through the plastic as black gas seeped out. It's hard to explain exactly what it looked like. It was a gas, but it moved like a liquid. But that's just the thing. It moved. Not just poured out, it moved with purpose. It swayed from side to side before dissolving into the ground. The ferryman freaked out as a confused crow took flight. Damn it! Gosh damn it! He got out! One of them sprinted for the church. The other hurried up to the gurney and brought out 3 sets of straps from underneath. He positioned them over the legs, chest, and head of the body in a trained routine. Seconds later, the body moved. It wasn't a conscious movement as much as a spasm. Some dying mechanism triggering at full power, causing the whole body to flex. If he hadn't tightened the straps, more of the plastic would have ripped. There was still some black inside. Using duct tape, he secured the hole the crow had poked. "Get inside," he screamed. "Get inside now." It was full panic inside the church. The children who hadn't left yet were being held to the floor by their parents. The other ferryman was sprinting to his car to get the others. Pastor Oswald held a walkie-talkie in his left hand and a bone saw in his right. I walked up to him, watching his demeanor change from calm and collected to borderline frantic. "What is the bone saw for?" I asked. He looked up at me, but didn't answer. He kept his eyes trained on the children. "What is the bone saw for?" I repeated. He swallowed hard, regaining his composure. "Safety measures. I get the OP has a report to do, but I don't know about you guys. We're running for the hills, right? Like, at this point, mysterious black mist, and now the pastor's holding a bone saw. Later. Sorry, let's continue. Pastor Oswald got regular updates through his walkie-talkie. They were going house by house, checking all the children in town. What exactly they were checking for wasn't apparent. They were doing a sort of head count, listing off the family names of those cleared. The kids who were held down were being let up as suspicions faded. Things seemed to be okay for now. "Check the wheat fields," Pastor Oswald demanded. Harlan liked the wheat fields. I noted it in my book and looked for Uncle Jerry. He was off in the corner, staying well out of everyone's way. I hurried up to him. I barely got the question out of my mouth before he answered it. "It's not just a lung disease," he whispered. "It's unnatural, defiant." "I don't understand." "Some things don't work as they're supposed to," he explained. "When explanation fails to account for impossible things, sometimes we just have to make do with what works." "Then explain it. Explain what you think happens." He looked at me, then back at the congregation. The tension was starting to subside. "Old Harlan didn't want to go yet," he said, "so he clawed his way back for one more go. He just needs to find someone willing to carry on for him." "Like a possession?" Jerry looked around the room and gave me the tiniest nod. As the congregation's tolerance to outsiders waned, Pastor Oswald hurriedly asked me to leave. He wasn't harsh about it, but rather matter-of-factly. This was a time of crisis in his community, and he couldn't take the time to be a good host. He insisted I come back in a couple of days when things calmed down, and he'd be happy to explain exactly what happened. But for now, I had to leave. I got in my car, waved goodbye to Uncle Jerry, and slowly made my way out of town. Not exactly the way I'd expected my day to go, but I wasn't about to intrude. Not on a night like this. I carefully bumped my way down the shitty road leading out of town and took a left. My car kept complaining about the Wi-Fi connection. I followed the road curling back and forth. There were no street lights, but the moon was as large as ever. That, and I wasn't really expecting to see a lot of people on these roads. That is, until I noticed something up ahead. There was a car in the middle of the road. The motor was still running. I could see the exhaust. The driver's side door was wide open and covered in blood. I stayed in my car, trying to get a signal on my phone. It didn't work. I shuffled my way out the door. I had to check if someone was injured. I mean, it sure looked like someone was injured, but there was no damage to the car. They hadn't hit anything. There was just a lot of open doors and blood, especially in the driver's seat. I called out to see if there was anyone there, but no one responded. The keys were still in the ignition. There was a comic book in the back seat. It was torn in half. I turned back towards my car and stopped. There was someone standing next to it, looking in through the window. The silhouette was barely covered by the moonlight, showing a figure with one arm much bigger than the other. A tilted torso shaped like a lowercase b. I could see the gleam of white in their eyes, but there was too much of it. Too many. It turned to me, still holding something in its left hand. It left a bloody handprint on my car. It tried to speak, but all that came out was a painful, drawn-out wailing. It was fast, much faster than me for sure. The moment it started running, I was only about 6 steps ahead. I threw myself into the parked car and slammed the driver's side door shut. I crawled over to the passenger side as the door was torn straight off and thrown down the road. I crawled out the other side and shut the passenger door behind me, trapping whatever was coming for me in the car, at least for a couple of seconds. It didn't take long for it to break through. I couldn't just run down the road in a straight line. It would catch me. I had to try and lose it. There was a wheat field on the left side of the road, and I figured I could lose it in there. I ran straight into it, keeping my head down and slowing only to hide my sound. I could hear something following me, something frustrated with a deep, wheezing breath, like a man slowly choking to death. I managed to find a spot in the middle of the field where I could duck down. It was right by the edge, in the shade of a tree. There was no way that thing would accidentally find me here. I listened to it shuffling about. It was nowhere near me, but I could tell there was something wrong with it. Its proportions were wrong. The sounds were wrong. It tried to speak, but it turned into either screams or a strangely coherent stutter. It sounded like words, but I couldn't make them out. Then I looked up. A family of crows tilted their heads down at me. One of them hopped along a branch, inspected me, and cawed. The others followed suit. I don't think they meant anything bad, but they drew attention to me. Soon, that thing was coming my way. I tried to get away, but even at a sprint, I was nowhere near as fast. I remember something knocking me to the ground and putting a foot on my back. At least I think it was a foot. It was big enough to be a car tire. Something wrapped around my ankle and twisted. Twisted, pulled, and twisted again. I'm not going to try and explain the pain of several compound fractures to someone who has never broken a bone, but it's a terrifying violation. Your body is being willfully and forcefully disfigured in a way it never has. That thing was tearing off my leg at the knee. And it did. I've experienced pain and fear before, but the mortality of imminent death is something that's hard to explain. It's a category of its own. There's a searing pain in your nerves, an intense scalding heat, and as that heat grows ever worse, the rest of your body grows cold. You start to focus on such pinprick, minute details. The exact shape of a leaf on the ground, the texture of a grain of sand. Your mouth turns dry as you realize you can't force your eyes into focus. I was lying there on my stomach, my head to the side, bleeding out. The big thing lumbered away as someone joined me at my side. A man sat down in the grass, leaning against a tree. The crows didn't seem to react to him like they did with me. It was Uncle Jerry. "They don't mean to do it," he said. "They're not even scared. It's just like clawing your way to the surface for air. It's what comes naturally." I couldn't answer. I was trying to conserve my breath. "This happened to you too," he continued, "back when I went." Oh my gosh. Sorry guys, that's crazy. The chills I just got. So the funeral that he got Good Friday long was Uncle Jerry's funeral. But wait, hold on, we gotta read more. My eyes rolled, looking for him. I saw his shape, but it was diffuse, transparent. They got most of me out before I caught hold, cut the extra arms off and all, but part of me is still in there, just a bit distant. I could hear something shuffling around in the field. Whatever did this to me was still out there. "I'm not here to gloat," Jerry explained. "I've had time to calm down, to come to terms with things. Your life is yours. I accept that. Honestly, I'm just glad we had a chance to talk." He leaned in close, stroking my hair. I remember back when I was small, crying in my mother's arms. He was the man on the table, all those years. "If you let me in, I'll make this work. Just this once. What do you say?" I couldn't say anything, but I didn't have to. He knew my answer. I would do anything for a couple more breaths. I felt my pulse slow. I could focus, not just on a single straw of grass, but the whole field. I could wet my tongue and wipe the sweat from my brow. I scooched a little, expecting a fountain of pain from my missing leg, but nothing came of it. Looking down, I was fine. I had a new leg. The skin and hair of it looked a little darker, but it was a leg. It just wasn't mine. It took some time to get used to. By the time I got up off the ground, the thing was still running through the fields, tearing up swaths of wheat and wailing at the top of its lungs. It would stop at times to cough and wheeze, looking up at the moon. It seemed fascinated by it, like it really enjoyed the outdoors while simultaneously letting out a terrified scream. Two wills, one body. I made my way back to the main road. There were more cars there. The ferrymen, along with a couple of volunteers. They were armed. The headlights from their cars cast these long shadows stretching down the road, highlighting the blood, some of which was mine, dripping from the torn edge of my pant leg. "It's in the fields," I said, pointing. "It's big." "Just the one?" "Just one." They fanned out and readied their weapons. The last thing I heard before they entered the wheat field was a silent, "Sorry, Harland." Seconds later, they were shooting. I sat down in my car, adjusting the seat to the new length of my leg. I heard the shooting, then the shooting stopped. They burned something in the field and dragged the abandoned car off the road. A couple days later, I talked to my aunt. She confirmed that I had had an Uncle Jerry and that I went to his funeral as a kid. That was the time I caught Good Friday long. Apparently, I was one of the first kids to survive it. She didn't want to get into specifics, but it had been violent. You have to do something terrible to stop it from expanding in a host. Researching it further, the best explanation of the condition is that a newly dead body sort of finds its way into a younger one, like a person desperate for air, except two people can't inhabit the same space. It collides, creating something twisted and in between. It can be stopped if noticed immediately, but even then, chances are slim. I wrote a paper about it, but it was rejected. I had to go to one of my backup subjects. This was a couple of years ago, and I've tried to gain some legitimacy. I've had my leg tested, but they haven't found a reason why it looks so different, or is of different length. Yes, at glance, it looks like something just slap grafted onto my knee, But that explanation has been denied several times. There's no scar tissue, no mending marks on the bone, nothing. It's like it was supposed to be there. And of course, I wonder if this is going to happen to me someday. I was born there, but I haven't lived there. How can you know whether you're part of this chain or not? You won't know for sure until you're gone, and by then, you're not experiencing anything. Or maybe in the case of Harland, you are. Do I want to? What's the alternative? I have plenty of years left to consider this, and I don't think I'll ever have a clear answer. Just to be sure, I think I'll have a final request upon my passing. Make sure my body is properly shrink wrapped. In this one, this town treats this like it's far too ordinary. And they're so secretive about it. Like they don't really want to tell the OP, but the OP keeps prying about it, thankfully. But yeah, every answer they get makes it more alarming. And then by the end of it, just the title, Shrink Wrapping Your Dead, doesn't sound that crazy anymore. It sounds completely necessary. Anyways, that's all the unsettling Reddit stories in Minecraft I have for you today. If you guys enjoyed this video and you're still awake at this point, thank you so much for watching. And yeah, subscribe, like, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.